This documentary traces the complete history of Austria, from its origins as a Celtic kingdom through Roman occupation, medieval fragmentation, 6 centuries of Habsburg rule, and its transformation into the modern republic we know today. Around 450 years before the Common Era, the territory we now call Austria was inhabited by Celtic peoples who had developed one of the most sophisticated cultures in prehistoric Europe. To understand who these people were, we need to establish what the Celts actually were. The term Celtic refers to a broad group of tribal societies sharing related languages, artistic styles, and social structures. They were not a unified nation, but rather a collection of tribes spread across much of Western and Central Europe, from Ireland to modern-day Turkey, in the region that would become Austria. These Celtic peoples created something remarkable. Near the modern town of Hallstatt, in the Salzkammergut region of Upper Austria, archaeologists discovered burial sites containing thousands of graves, dating from approximately 1200 to 500 BCE. The wealth and sophistication of these graves gave this period its name, the Hallstatt culture. This culture represents the earliest phase of the Iron Age in Central Europe. The source of Hallstatt's wealth was salt. This requires explanation because modern audiences often underestimate salt's historical importance. Before refrigeration, salt was the primary method of preserving food. Meat, fish, and vegetables could be stored for months or years when properly salted. This made salt essential for survival, particularly in winter months. Communities with access to salt could preserve their harvests, sustain larger populations, and trade the surplus. Salt was so valuable that it was sometimes called white gold. The Hallstatt region contained massive salt deposits deep within the mountains. Celtic miners developed sophisticated techniques to extract this salt. They carved tunnels hundreds of meters into the rock, using bronze and later iron tools. The mines required advanced engineering to prevent collapse, manage water infiltration, and ventilate the deep shafts. Evidence shows these miners used wooden supports, drainage channels, and even primitive lighting systems using pine torches. The scale of these operations was extraordinary for the period. Thousands of workers would have been required to maintain production levels that we can estimate from the archaeological record. This industrial-scale mining created concentrated wealth. The burial sites at Hallstatt demonstrate this clearly. Graves contain not just local goods, but imported items from across Europe and the Mediterranean. Archaeologists have found amber from the Baltic Sea, coral from the Mediterranean, ivory from North Africa, and bronze vessels from Italy. One grave contained a ceremonial sword with a handle wrapped in gold wire. Another held bronze vessels decorated with geometric patterns characteristic of Greek workshops. This distribution of grave goods tells us several things. First, Hallstatt society was hierarchical, with clear distinctions between wealthy elites and common people. Second, that these elites controlled extensive trade networks. Third, they had regular contact with the more advanced civilizations of the Mediterranean world, particularly the Greeks and Etruscans. The trade routes themselves were crucial to understanding this period. The Alps, rather than being a barrier, functioned as a controlled gateway. Several passes allowed movement between the Mediterranean and Central Europe. But these passes were difficult and dangerous. Communities that controlled them could charge tolls, provide guides, and monopolize the flow of goods. The Hallstatt Celts positioned themselves perfectly to exploit this geography. By approximately 400 BCE, the political organization of this region had evolved significantly. The loose tribal structures began consolidating into what we can reasonably call kingdoms. The most important of these was Noricum. The Kingdom of Noricum emerged in the territory covering much of modern Austria, from the Alps to the Danube River. Its core territory included what are now the Austrian states of Salzburg, Styria, Carinthia, and parts of Upper Austria. Noricum was not a kingdom in the medieval sense, with centralized bureaucracy and standing armies. Rather, it functioned as a confederation of related Celtic tribes who recognized the common leadership and coordinated their external relations. The capital, or primary settlement, was likely located near modern Magdalensburg in Carinthia, though this remains debated among historians. What made Noricum significant was not just salt, but iron. The region contained high-quality iron ore deposits, particularly in the area called the Erzberg, or Ore Mountain, in modern Styria. The Norici, as the inhabitants were called, developed advanced metallurgical techniques. They produced a type of steel that Roman sources later praised as superior to their own. This steel, created through sophisticated forging techniques that removed impurities and controlled carbon content, was lighter and more durable than typical iron weapons and tools of the period. The combination of salt and steel made Noricum wealthy. But what made it historically important was how it managed its relationship with the expanding Roman Republic. By the 2nd century BCE, Rome had conquered most of Italy and was expanding northward into what the Romans called Gaul, roughly modern France. The Romans needed access to resources beyond Italy, and they needed secure routes to their northern territories. But Noricum occupied a strategic position. Roman armies and traders moving north from Italy had to cross either the difficult Alpine passes that Noricum controlled or take much longer routes around the mountains. The Norici could have resisted Roman expansion, as many Celtic tribes did. Instead, they chose diplomacy. The transformation came in 15 BC, when the Roman Emperor Augustus decided that informal alliances were no longer sufficient. The Germanic tribes pushing southward toward the Danube River posed a direct threat to Roman Italy, and Augustus needed a secure defensive line. The solution was to formalize Roman control over the Alpine region. What happened next was unusual in Roman military history. Noricum was annexed without a battle. The Norici leadership, recognizing that resistance would be futile and costly, negotiated the terms of their incorporation into the Roman Empire. They agreed to accept Roman governors, pay Roman taxes, and allow Roman military presence in their territory. In return, they retained local autonomy in daily governance, kept their existing elite families in positions of authority, and saw their cities gain Roman legal status. This peaceful transition meant that Noricum became a Roman province through what was essentially a legal act rather than a conquest. For the Roman Empire, which typically expanded through bloody military campaigns, this was remarkable. The province of Noricum was formally established, and its territory became part of the empire's defensive structure. But Noricum was not alone in this process. Augustus conducted simultaneous campaigns to secure the entire Alpine frontier. To the west of Noricum, the region called Raetia, covering modern Western Austria, southern Bavaria, and parts of Switzerland, was conquered by Augustus's stepsons, Tiberius and Drusus, in 15 BC. Unlike Noricum, Raetia required military subjugation. The Raetian tribes fought against Roman forces, but were eventually defeated. This territory became the province of Raetia. To the east of Noricum lay Pannonia, covering modern eastern Austria, western Hungary, and parts of the Balkans. Pannonia proved more difficult to pacify. The region saw repeated revolts, most notably a major uprising from 6 to 9 AD that required significant Roman military resources to suppress. Once controlled, Pannonia became one of Rome's most important frontier provinces. These three provinces, Raetia, Noricum, and Pannonia formed Rome's northern defensive line along the Danube River. The Danube became what Romans called the Limes, the fortified frontier of the empire. The river itself served as a natural barrier, but the Romans reinforced it with a system of military camps, watchtowers, and fortified settlements stretching from the Black Forest to the Black Sea. One of these military camps would become Austria's most important city. In the 1st century AD, the Romans established a legionary fortress at a strategic point where the Danube bends and the Vienna woods provide natural protection. They called this camp Vindobona. The name likely derives from a Celtic term, suggesting there was already a settlement here before the Romans arrived. Vindobona's location was ideal. It controlled the river crossing, protected the eastern approaches to the Alpine passes, and sat at the intersection of several military roads. A full Roman legion, approximately 5,000 professional soldiers, was stationed at Vindobona. These were not temporary troops, but permanent garrison forces who lived in the camp with their families, built substantial infrastructure, and created a hybrid military-civilian community. Around the military fortress, a civilian settlement grew, populated by merchants, craftsmen, and families of soldiers. This pattern repeated across the frontier. Military camps spawned civilian towns, which attracted trade, which generated wealth, which funded further construction. The process of Romanization, the adoption of Roman language, customs, architecture, and law, occurred rapidly in these provinces. Latin became the language of administration and commerce, though local Celtic languages persisted in rural areas, and Roman architectural styles transformed the cities. Buildings were constructed with stone rather than wood, using Roman techniques like concrete, arches, and organized street plans. Public baths, forums, temples, and amphitheaters appeared in major settlements. The road system was perhaps Rome's most lasting contribution. Roman engineers built a network of paved roads connecting military camps, towns, and border crossings. These weren't simple dirt paths, but engineered highways with graded surfaces, drainage systems, and mile markers. The roads served military purposes, allowing rapid troop movement, but also facilitated trade and communication. Major routes crossed the Alpine passes, connecting Italy to the Danubian provinces and continuing north toward the Rhine and east toward the Balkans. The economic integration that followed was substantial. The region's salt mines and iron deposits were now organized under Roman oversight, with production increasing to meet imperial demands. Agricultural patterns changed as well. The Romans introduced new crops, particularly grapes for wine production. Viticulture spread along the Danube and in sheltered Alpine valleys. The wine produced here was not of Mediterranean quality, but it supplied the frontier legions and local markets. Urban centers expanded significantly during this period. Carnuntum, located east of Vindobona near modern Petronell Carnuntum, became the capital of Pannonia Superior and one of the largest cities on the northern frontier. At its peak, Carnuntum housed perhaps 50,000 people, with stone buildings, paved streets, sophisticated water systems, and all the amenities of a Roman provincial capital. Excavations have revealed an amphitheater that seated 13,000 spectators, demonstrating the scale of urban development. Religious practices also evolved. The Romans were religiously tolerant, allowing local deities to continue being worshipped. But they also introduced their own gods. A practice called interpretatio romana emerged, where local Celtic gods were equated with Roman equivalents. A Celtic fertility goddess might be identified with Venus, a warrior god with Mars. New cults arrived as well, brought by soldiers from across the empire. The worship of Mithras, a mystery religion popular among soldiers, spread through the frontier camps. Evidence of Mithraic temples has been found at several sites in Austria. Christianity arrived in the province during the 2nd and 3rd centuries AD. Initially, a minority religion practiced mainly in urban centers. It spread gradually despite periodic persecutions. By the 4th century, Christian communities existed in all major towns, and bishops had been appointed to oversee congregations. The transition from paganism to Christianity occurred slowly, with both belief systems coexisting for generations. For nearly 400 years, this region remained a stable, prosperous part of the Roman Empire. The frontier held, trade flourished, cities grew, the population became thoroughly Romanized. Yet there was constant awareness of the threat beyond the Danube. Germanic tribes, Marcomanni, Quadi, Yazyges, and others, pressed against the frontier, sometimes trading peacefully, sometimes raiding. The collapse began not with a single catastrophic event, but with a cascading series of pressures that Roman institutions could no longer withstand. By the early 5th century, the Western Roman Empire faced simultaneous crises: economic decline, political instability, military overstretching, and most critically, mass movements of peoples from the east pushing westward. The first shock came from the Huns. This nomadic confederation, originating from the steppes of Central Asia, swept into Europe in the late 4th century with devastating effect. The Huns were horse archers who fought with tactics unfamiliar to European peoples. Their arrival triggered a domino effect as Germanic tribes, fleeing Hun pressure, pushed into Roman territory seeking refuge or conquest. In 405 AD, Roman legions began withdrawing from the frontier provinces to defend Italy itself. The garrisons at Vindobona, Carnuntum, and other Danubian forts were either recalled or simply abandoned when the empire could no longer pay them. Without military protection, the civilian populations faced impossible choices. Flee south toward what remained of Roman authority, attempt to defend their cities with inadequate forces, or negotiate with incoming peoples. The Huns themselves reached the region in the mid-5th century under their most famous leader, Attila. Between 440 and 453 AD, Attila's forces controlled vast territories from the steppes to the Rhine. His power base was in the Pannonian Plain, the flat lands east of Vindobona. From here, he launched raids in all directions, extracting tribute from what remained of the Roman Empire and terrorizing settlements throughout the region. Attila's death in 453 triggered the disintegration of the Hun Confederation. The subject peoples rebelled, and within a generation, Hun power vanished almost completely. But the damage was done. The urban centers that had flourished under Roman rule were either destroyed or severely depopulated. Carnuntum, which had housed tens of thousands, was abandoned. Its stone buildings were gradually dismantled by later settlers who used the dressed stone for other purposes. Vindobona shrank to a fraction of its former size. Into this power vacuum came the Ostrogoths. These were Germanic peoples who had previously lived under Hun domination. Following Attila's collapse, they established themselves in Pannonia and eventually moved into Italy, where their king Theodoric established a kingdom that controlled the Italian peninsula and territories north of the Alps. The Ostrogothic period, roughly 490 to 550 AD, brought some stability to the region, though nothing approaching Roman administrative capacity. The Ostrogothic kingdom fell to Byzantine forces, the Eastern Roman Empire, in a devastating war that lasted from 535 to 554. This Gothic war destroyed much of what remained of classical civilization in Italy and the surrounding regions. Cities were besieged, populations massacred or enslaved, and agricultural production collapsed. The Lombards arrived next. Another Germanic people. They invaded Italy from the north in 568, establishing a kingdom that would last over 200 years. The Lombards controlled northern Italy and influenced the Alpine approaches, but their presence in what is now Austria was limited and temporary. More significant were the Avars. This nomadic confederation, possibly related to the Huns, established dominance over the Pannonian Plain and surrounding regions from the late 6th century onward. The Avars were formidable warriors who built a powerful khaganate, a nomadic empire, centered in modern Hungary but extending west into Austria. They conducted raids deep into Byzantine and Frankish territories, extracting tribute and slaves. The Avar presence fundamentally changed the demographics of the region. They brought with them a mixed population of subject peoples and absorbed local populations into their confederation. Archaeological evidence shows Avar burial sites with distinctive grave goods, belt fittings, weapons, horse equipment, and personal ornaments that blend steppe traditions with local influences. Simultaneously, Slavic peoples began migrating into the region from the east. The Slavs were not a unified political entity, but rather numerous tribes speaking related languages. Unlike the nomadic Avars or the Germanic warriors, the Slavs were primarily agriculturalists. They settled in river valleys and cleared forests for farming, establishing villages and gradually populating areas that had been depopulated during earlier invasions. The relationship between Avars and Slavs was complex. In some cases, my Slavic tribes were subjects of the Avar Khaganate. In others, they were autonomous groups taking advantage of the power vacuum. Over time, Slavic settlement became permanent and widespread, particularly in what are now the southern and eastern parts of Austria. From the west, Bavarian tribes began expanding eastward. The Bavarians were a Germanic people who emerged in what is now southern Germany during the 6th century. Unlike the raiding nomads or migrating Slavs, the Bavarians established more organized political structures. They were Christian, having been converted by missionaries from the Frankish kingdoms to their west. Bavarian expansion into the former Roman provinces occurred gradually through the 7th and 8th centuries. They founded settlements, cleared land, and pushed eastward along the Danube Valley. And this expansion was not organized conquest, but rather a slow colonization by farmers, monks, and local lords seeking new territory. Bavarian settlement patterns established communities that would persist for centuries. During this entire period, roughly 400 to 800 AD, the material culture of the region regressed dramatically. The stone buildings of the Roman period fell into ruin or were cannibalized for materials. The sophisticated road network deteriorated as no authority maintained it. Literacy nearly disappeared outside of religious communities. The specialized crafts that had flourished under Roman rule, glassmaking, fine metalwork, sophisticated pottery, declined as trade networks collapsed and urban markets vanished. Archaeological layers from this period show a stark contrast to Roman levels below and later medieval levels above. Settlements were smaller, built of wood rather than stone. Artifacts were cruder and more utilitarian. Coinage ceased to circulate in most areas, indicating a return to barter economies. The population density fell dramatically from Roman peaks. Yet, not everything disappeared. Christianity survived, primarily through monasteries. Monastic communities, often founded in remote locations, preserved Latin literacy, maintained religious practices, and served as centers of continuity. Monks copied manuscripts, keeping classical and religious texts in existence through the darkest periods. These monasteries also served practical functions, providing hospitality to travelers, medical care, and agricultural expertise. Important monastic foundations from this period included the Abbey of St. Peter in Salzburg, traditionally dated to around 696. Though the actual founding may be earlier, Salzburg would become a crucial center of Christian culture and missionary activity in the region. Other monasteries were established by Bavarian and Frankish monks, pushing eastward, bringing Christianity and literacy back to areas where both had faded. The political situation remained fragmented. No single authority controlled the entire region. The Avar Khaganate dominated the eastern areas. Bavarian dukes controlled the west. Slavic tribes occupied the southern regions. Various small lordships and tribal territories filled the gaps. This fragmentation meant constant small-scale warfare, raiding, and shifting boundaries. Charlemagne became King of the Franks in 768 and immediately began transforming his kingdom into an empire. The Frankish realm, centered in what is now France and Western Germany, was the strongest Christian power in Western Europe. Charlemagne's ambitions extended in all directions, but the eastern frontier presented a particular challenge: the Avar Khaganate. The Avars had dominated the Pannonian Plain and surrounding territories for over 2 centuries. Their fortified settlements, called rings, were circular earthwork enclosures that served as military bases and treasure repositories. The largest of these, the Ring of the Avars, was a massive fortification complex in the Hungarian plain. Avar power rested on mounted warfare, control of tribute networks, and accumulated wealth from generations of raiding. Charlemagne launched his first campaign against the Avars in 788. This was not a single battle, but a systematic military effort lasting years. Frankish armies advanced from multiple directions, besieging Avar fortifications and disrupting their military organization. The Franks employed different tactics than previous opponents: coordinated infantry, siege equipment, and most importantly, sustained pressure rather than single raids. The decisive campaigns occurred between 791 and 796. Frankish forces captured the Avar Ring in 795, seizing the accumulated treasure of centuries. Contemporary sources describe the plunder in staggering terms: wagon trains loaded with gold, silver, and precious objects transported back to Charlemagne's court. This wealth, distributed among Frankish nobles and churches, demonstrated the economic value of conquest and funded further expansion. The destruction of Avar power created a vacuum. The Khaganate disintegrated rapidly. Some Avar groups converted to Christianity and submitted to Frankish authority. Others fled eastward or were absorbed into Slavic populations. By 800, the political entity that had dominated the region for 2 centuries no longer existed as a meaningful force. Charlemagne needed to organize this conquered territory. The solution was to establish a frontier province called a march. The term march derives from a Germanic word meaning border or boundary. A march was not a normal province, but a militarized zone specifically designed to defend against external threats. The march east of Bavaria was called the Ostmark, literally the Eastern March. The Ostmark extended from the Enns River eastward to the Vienna woods and south into the Alpine foothills. Its primary function was defensive. The march was governed by military commanders called margraves, who held both military and civil authority. These margraves had greater autonomy than typical governors, because frontier conditions required rapid decision-making without waiting for approval from distant royal courts. The population of the Ostmark was mixed. Bavarian settlers moved eastward, encouraged by land grants from Frankish authorities. Slavic populations remained in place, particularly in southern areas. remnant Avar groups existed in the eastern regions. The Franks did not attempt to expel these populations, but rather to control them through a network of fortifications and loyal local lords. Monasteries played a crucial role in consolidating Frankish control. Salzburg, already an established ecclesiastical center, became the base for missionary activity throughout the March. The Archbishop of Salzburg sent priests and monks to establish churches, convert populations, and create ecclesiastical administration parallel to military governance. These religious foundations were not purely spiritual. They served political purposes by extending Frankish cultural influence and creating loyalty to Christian authorities. The March system worked well for approximately a century. Then, a new threat emerged from the east. The Magyars were a nomadic people, linguistically related to Finns and Estonians, but adopting many steppe cultural practices. They migrated westward from the Ural region under pressure from other nomadic groups. Around 895, the Magyar tribes crossed the Carpathian Mountains and settled in the Pannonian Plain, the same region the Avars had previously controlled. Unlike the Avars, who took centuries to build their power, the Magyars became a threat almost immediately. They were expert horsemen using composite bows and hit-and-run tactics. Magyar raiding parties could cover enormous distances rapidly, striking deep into Europe and retreating before organized defense could respond. The first Magyar raids into the Ostmark began around 900. Over the following decades, these raids became regular and devastating. Magyar forces would sweep through the march, burning settlements, capturing slaves, stealing livestock, and disappearing before Frankish armies could engage them effectively. The raids penetrated far beyond the march. Magyar warriors reached Burgundy, northern Italy, and southern Germany. These incursions had severe economic and demographic consequences. Agricultural production collapsed in exposed areas because farmers could not work fields under constant threat. Settlements were fortified or abandoned. The population declined as people fled westward to safer regions. The careful organization that Charlemagne and his successors had established deteriorated under sustained pressure. The political situation worsened because the Frankish Empire itself was fragmenting. Charlemagne died in 814, and his son Louis the Pious died in 840. The empire was divided among Louis's sons, leading to civil wars and political instability. The eastern portion of the empire, which included Bavaria and the Ostmark, fell to Louis the German, but his authority was contested and weak. This political weakness meant inadequate defense. Local lords had to organize their own protection without support from royal authorities. Some made tribute payments to Magyar raiders to avoid attacks. Others fortified positions and tried to wait out the raids. None of these measures addressed the fundamental problem. No military force in the region could defeat the Magyars in open battle. The Magyar threat persisted for over 50 years. By the mid-10th century, the situation appeared hopeless. The March had effectively ceased to function as a military buffer. Magyar raids penetrated deep into German territories year after year. The transformation came from Saxony. Otto, Duke of Saxony, became king of the East Frankish Kingdom, increasingly called the Kingdom of Germany, in 936. Otto was an effective military leader who recognized that defeating the Magyars required different tactics. Instead of trying to chase mobile raiders, Otto focused on building disciplined heavy cavalry forces that could engage Magyar warriors directly. The decisive confrontation occurred on August 10, 955, near the city of Augsburg in southern Bavaria. A massive Magyar army besieged the city, while Otto assembled German forces from across his kingdom. The ensuing Battle of Lechfeld was one of the most significant military engagements of the 10th century. Otto's forces totaled perhaps 8,000 armored cavalry and infantry. The Magyar army was larger, possibly 15,000 warriors. Although the battle lasted a full day. The Magyars initially succeeded in attacking the German rear, capturing the supply train. But Otto's heavy cavalry, protected by armor and fighting in organized formations, gradually broke the Magyar lines. The Magyar retreat became a rout. German forces pursued the fleeing enemy for days, killing or capturing thousands. The Battle of Lechfeld broke Magyar military power. They never again raided Western Europe on that scale. Within a generation, the Magyars settled permanently in the Pannonian Plain, converted to Christianity, and established the Kingdom of Hungary. The transformation from nomadic raiders to settled kingdom was remarkably rapid. In 976, Emperor Otto II granted the Eastern March to Leopold of Babenberg. The Babenbergs were a noble family from Bavaria, with proven loyalty to the imperial house and military capability. Leopold, later known as Leopold I, received the march with the title of Margrave, giving him hereditary control over the territory and responsibility for its defense and administration. Leopold established his initial base at Poschlarn on the Danube, but quickly recognized that the strategic center of his territory lay further east. The old Roman settlement of Vindobona, though reduced from its ancient size, still occupied a defensible position where the Danube curved and the Vienna woods provided natural protection. Leopold and his successors gradually shifted their administrative focus toward this location. The early Babenberg period focused on consolidation rather than expansion. The Margraves built fortifications along the Danube, established relationships with the church through monastery foundations and land grants, and encouraged settlement by offering favorable terms to incoming Bavarian farmers. The population grew steadily as agricultural production increased, and the absence of Magyar raids allowed normal economic activity to resume. The succession passed smoothly through several generations. Each Babenberg Margrave strengthened the family's position through careful management, strategic marriages, and military competence. By the early 12th century, the March was among the most stable and prosperous territories in the empire. Leopold III, who ruled from 1195 to 1136, became the most venerated of the early Babenbergs. He founded several monasteries, and including Klosterneuburg near Vienna, which became a major religious and cultural center. Leopold was known for his piety, fair governance, and successful military campaigns against Hungarian incursions. After his death, his reputation for sanctity led to his eventual canonization. He is now the patron saint of Austria, though that name and concept did not yet exist in his time. The decisive political transformation came in 1156 during the reign of Leopold III's son, Henry II Yasemir Gott. Henry had ambitions beyond simply governing a march. He wanted elevation to ducal status, which would give him greater prestige, independence, and rights within the imperial structure. The opportunity came through imperial politics. Emperor Frederick Barbarossa needed to resolve a dispute involving Bavaria and the Babenberg March. The Duke of Bavaria had lost a political conflict and was being stripped of some territories. Frederick saw a chance to satisfy multiple parties while strengthening his own position. He separated the march from Bavarian oversight and elevated it to an independent duchy through a document called the Privilegium Minus. This charter, issued on September 17, 1156, granted exceptional rights. The new Duchy of Austria, this is the first time the territory was officially called Austria, derived from Ostarrîchi, a German version of Ostmark, could be inherited through the female line if there were no male heirs. This was unusual in an era when most fiefs could only pass to males. The Duke gained the right to mint coins, hold courts, and exercise authority normally reserved for higher-ranking princes. Essentially, the Privilegium Minus made Austria one of the most autonomous territories within the empire. Henry Jasimir Gott made Vienna the permanent ducal capital in 1155, shortly before receiving the ducal title. Vienna's population at this time was perhaps 5,000 people, small by modern standards, but significant for the region. The city expanded beyond the old Roman fortifications, with new walls constructed to enclose growing suburbs. Stone buildings replaced wooden structures in the city center. Markets attracted merchants from across Central Europe. The Babenbergs involved themselves in the Crusades, the military expeditions launched by Western European Christians to capture and hold Jerusalem and other sites in the Holy Land. Duke Leopold V participated in the Third Crusade, departing in 1190. This crusade brought together the major monarchs of Europe: Richard I of England, Philip II of France, and Emperor Frederick Barbarossa. The crusade was militarily successful in some respects. The Crusaders captured several coastal cities and secured access to Jerusalem for Christian pilgrims, but also marked by bitter disputes among the leaders. At the Siege of Acre in 1191, a conflict erupted between Leopold and Richard over precedence and the distribution of plunder. Richard, arrogant and dismissive, insulted Leopold publicly and had the Austrian banner thrown from the city walls. Leopold left the crusade humiliated and returned to Austria nursing a grievance. Richard's return journey from the Holy Land in 1192 proved disastrous. Shipwrecked in the Adriatic, he attempted to travel overland through Central Europe in disguise. This was reckless. Richard had made enemies throughout the region. He was recognized and captured near Vienna in December 1192. Leopold imprisoned Richard in various castles, most famously Dürnstein on the Danube. The imprisonment became an international incident. The Pope demanded Richard's release. The English government needed their king back, but Leopold held firm, demanding an enormous ransom. 150,000 marks of silver, approximately 3 times England's annual royal revenue. The negotiations lasted over a year. England raised the money through heavy taxation and confiscation of church wealth. In February 1194, Richard was released after paying a substantial portion of the ransom. Leopold used this windfall to fund massive building projects across Austria. New castles, fortified towns, monastery expansions, and infrastructure improvements transformed the duchy. The ransom literally built Austria's medieval infrastructure. The cultural impact extended beyond architecture. The Crusades had exposed Austrian nobles to the sophisticated courts of the Mediterranean and the Middle East. They returned with new ideas about literature, music, and courtly behavior. The late 12th and early 13th centuries saw the flowering of Minnesang, the German tradition of courtly love poetry, performed by night poets called Minnesingers. The several famous Minnesingers were associated with the Babenberg court. Walther von der Vogelweide, the most celebrated German lyric poet of the Middle Ages, spent time at the Viennese court under Duke Leopold VI. Walther's poems addressed love, politics, and moral philosophy, reflecting the cultural ambitions of the Babenberg dukes who patronized such artists. The court at Vienna became a center of German literary culture, rivaling courts in the Rhineland and Swabia. Economic development accelerated during this period. The Danube served as a major commercial artery connecting Bavaria to Hungary and beyond. Vienna's position allowed it to profit from river trade through tolls, market rights, and merchant services. The duchy's mineral resources, particularly iron and salt, generated substantial revenues. Wine production expanded, with vineyards planted on south-facing slopes throughout the region. Urban development was not limited to Vienna. Towns like Krems, Wiener Neustadt, and Graz grew as administrative and commercial centers. These towns received charters granting self-governance rights, markets, and legal privileges. The Babenbergs encouraged urbanization because towns generated tax revenue, provided skilled craftsmen, and served as administrative centers for surrounding rural areas. The religious landscape diversified. The Cistercian order, known for disciplined monastic life and agricultural expertise, established several monasteries in Austria. These monasteries cleared forests, drained marshes, and improved farming techniques, increasing agricultural productivity. The military orders, the Templars and Hospitallers, also established houses in Austria, and reflecting the duchy's connection to crusading movements. Duke Frederick II, who began ruling in 1230, was known for his military prowess and quarrelsome nature. He fought repeatedly with neighboring powers, Bohemia, Hungary, and Bavaria, over borders and rights. His nickname, the Quarrelsome, reflected his temperament. Frederick also came into conflict with Emperor Frederick II over political control in the empire, at one point being placed under imperial ban. The vacuum created by Frederick's death immediately attracted competing claims. Emperor Frederick II, who had been at odds with the Austrian Duke, seized the opportunity to assert direct imperial control over Austria. He claimed the duchy as an escheated fief, a territory reverting to the overlord when the vassal line ended. However, the emperor's own position was weak. He faced rebellion in Germany, conflict with the papacy, and challenges to his authority throughout the empire. Frederick's sister Margaret became a pawn in political maneuvering. She was married twice in quick succession to German princes who hoped to claim Austria through her. The first was Henry of Hohenstaufen, the emperor's son, but he died within months in 1247. The second was Ottokar, heir to the Bohemian throne, in 1252. This second marriage would determine Austria's fate for the next quarter century. Ottokar was approximately 17 years old when he married the 46-year-old Margaret. The marriage was purely political, arranged to give Ottokar a claim to the Austrian duchy through his wife's Babenberg lineage. When Ottokar's father, King Wenceslaus I of Bohemia, died in 1253, Ottokar inherited the Bohemian crown. He now controlled both Bohemia, a wealthy kingdom with extensive silver mines and a strong military, and claimed Austria through marriage. Ottokar moved quickly to consolidate control. He suppressed opposition within Austria, installed loyal officials, and used Bohemian military forces to secure his position. The Austrian nobility, faced with the choice between accepting Ottokar or enduring continued instability, generally acquiesced. Vienna, Graz, and other major towns recognized him as their ruler. The emperor, still Emperor Frederick II, was in no position to challenge Ottokar effectively. Frederick died in 1250, and the imperial throne itself became contested in a period called the Great Interregnum. From 1254 to 1273, the empire had no universally recognized emperor. Various princes were elected by different factions, but none could establish undisputed authority. This power vacuum allowed ambitious rulers like Ottokar to expand without imperial interference. Ottokar did exactly that. In 1261, he had his marriage to Margaret annulled, claiming non-consummation and other canonical grounds. He immediately married Kunigunde, a much younger Hungarian princess who brought additional political connections. With Margaret set aside, Ottokar's claim to Austria theoretically weakened, but he was now too powerful to be challenged. He controlled the territory through military force and administrative control rather than purely legal right. He continued expanding. When the Duke of Styria died without heirs in 1262, Ottokar claimed that duchy as well. He acquired Carinthia and Carniola through similar combinations of inheritance claims, political maneuvering, and military pressure. By the late 1260s, Ottokar controlled a massive territorial bloc: Bohemia, Moravia, Austria, Styria, Carinthia, and Carniola. This extended from the Bohemian forests to the Adriatic Sea, making him the most powerful ruler in Central Europe. Ottokar's power was not just territorial, but economic. The Bohemian silver mines at Kutna Hora produced enormous wealth. Combined with revenues from Austrian trade, Styrian iron, and agricultural production across his domains, Ottokar commanded resources that exceeded those of most kings. He maintained a large professional army, including heavily armored cavalry and infantry forces equipped with the best weapons available. This concentration of power alarmed the German princes. A ruler controlling such vast territories from Bohemia to the Alps could dominate the empire regardless of who held the imperial title. When the princes finally agreed to end the interregnum and elect a new emperor in 1273, they deliberately chose a candidate unlikely to threaten their own interests: Rudolf of Habsburg. The Habsburgs were a minor noble family from southwestern Germany and Switzerland. They held some territories in the Alps and along the Rhine, but they were not among the great princely families. Rudolf himself was already 55 years old when elected, having spent his life managing modest family holdings and participating in local conflicts. The princes chose him precisely because he seemed weak, elderly, and unlikely to build a powerful imperial government that would threaten their autonomy. They badly misjudged him. Rudolf was an effective leader who understood that the imperial title, while lacking direct power, provided legitimacy and political leverage. His first priority was dealing with Ottokar, who refused to acknowledge Rudolf's election. Ottokar saw Rudolf as an upstart, a minor count who had no right to rule over a king. When Rudolf summoned Ottokar to perform homage for his imperial fiefs, Austria, Styria, Carinthia, and Carniola were all technically held from the emperor. Ottokar ignored the summons. This refusal gave Rudolf legal grounds to declare Ottokar in rebellion and to place him under imperial ban. More importantly, it allowed Rudolf to build a coalition against Ottokar. The King of Hungary, the Duke of Bavaria, and various German princes joined Rudolf, motivated by their own fears of Bohemian power or promises of territorial rewards. Rudolf assembled an army that, while not larger than Ottokar's, was sufficient to challenge him. The two armies met on August 26, 1278, on the Marchfeld, a flat plain northeast of Vienna. The Battle of Marchfeld, also called the Battle of Durnkreut after a nearby village, was one of the largest cavalry engagements of the 13th century. Both sides deployed thousands of armored knights and supporting infantry. Ottokar commanded the Bohemian Austrian forces personally. His army included the elite Bohemian cavalry, Austrian knights, and contingents from his various territories. Rudolf's forces were more diverse, combining Habsburg troops, Hungarian cavalry, and German princely contingents. The battle began with archery exchanges and probing attacks, then developed into a massive cavalry melee. The fighting lasted hours. Armored horsemen crashed together repeatedly, with individual combats and small unit actions occurring across the battlefield. The Hungarian cavalry, fighting on Rudolf's side, proved decisive. They executed a flanking maneuver that struck the Bohemian forces from an unexpected direction, creating confusion and breaking the formation. Ottokar's army began to collapse. In the chaos of retreat, Ottokar himself was surrounded and killed. The exact circumstances of his death are unclear. Some sources say he was killed in combat, others that he was murdered after attempting to surrender. Regardless, his death ended the battle decisively. The Bohemian Austrian army disintegrated, with survivors fleeing back toward their home territories. Rudolf moved immediately to secure his victory. He occupied Vienna and the other Austrian territories, appointing imperial administrators to govern temporarily. Ottokar's son, Wenceslaus II, inherited Bohemia, but had to renounce all claims to the Austrian lands. These territories, Austria, Styria, Carinthia, and Carniola, were declared imperial fiefs without a legitimate holder. Albert I, Rudolf's eldest son, governed Austria with a ruthlessness necessary to establish a new dynasty in hostile territory. The Austrian nobility resented Habsburg rule, viewing the family as foreign upstarts imposed by imperial authority. Albert responded to this resistance with calculated violence. He confiscated estates from nobles who opposed him, executed several prominent opponents, and installed loyal administrators throughout the duchy. This brutality established control, but also created lasting resentment. The consolidation extended beyond Austria proper. Albert secured Styria through direct administration, absorbing it into the Habsburg domains rather than treating it as a separate territory. Carinthia and Carniola proved more difficult to hold. Local nobles resisted Habsburg authority, and Albert lacked sufficient military resources to enforce control everywhere simultaneously. Eventually, these southern territories were granted to the Counts of Gorizia as imperial fiefs, removing them temporarily from Habsburg possession. Albert also pursued the imperial crown. After Rudolf's death, the princes elected Adolf of Nassau as emperor, deliberately choosing another minor noble to prevent Habsburg consolidation of power. Albert challenged this election militarily, defeating and killing Adolf at the Battle of Gullheim in 1398. The princes then elected Albert as Emperor Albert I, though his reign lasted only 10 years before his nephew assassinated him in 1308. The succession pattern that emerged demonstrates the Habsburg strategy clearly. Rather than pursuing the imperial title aggressively, which brought more prestige than actual power, the Habsburgs focused on accumulating hereditary territories. These lands could be controlled directly, taxed regularly, and passed to heirs without election. The family divided Austrian administration among brothers and cousins, with complex arrangements for shared governance and eventual reunification through inheritance. The acquisition of Tyrol illustrates this approach perfectly. Tyrol, the mountainous region controlling the Brenner Pass and other critical Alpine routes between Italy and Germany, belonged to the Counts of Gorizia. The Habsburgs pursued marriage alliances with this family over multiple generations. In 1335, Duke Otto the Merry married a Gorizia heiress, establishing a connection. When the male Gorizia line died out in 1363, the Habsburgs claimed Tyrol through these marriage ties. They faced competition from the Wittelsbach family of Bavaria, who also had claims. But through a combination of bribery, political maneuvering, and limited military action, the Habsburgs secured control. Tyrol's acquisition was finalized in 1363, adding crucial territory to the growing Habsburg domains. This process required patience. The Habsburgs planted marriage alliances decades before they yielded territorial gains. They maintained relationships with allied families, supported their interests, and positioned themselves as natural heirs when lines ended. This was cheaper than conquest and avoided the devastation that war inflicted on territories the Habsburgs wanted to rule. The family developed a deliberate dynastic policy. Daughters were married to heirs of neighboring territories. Sons were married to heiresses of wealthy families. These marriages were negotiated with extraordinary care, with legal agreements specifying inheritance rights, dowries, and contingencies for various succession scenarios. The Habsburgs became expert in the complex legal frameworks of medieval inheritance law, using these rules to maximize territorial gains. Duke Rudolf IV, who ruled from 1358 to 1365, took a different approach to enhancing Habsburg prestige. Unable to compete militarily with more powerful princes, Rudolf turned to forgery and cultural patronage. In 1358, he presented a document called the Privilegium Maius, allegedly issued by Emperor Frederick Barbarossa, granting Austria exceptional rights within the empire. The document elevated the Austrian duke to Archduke, a unique title superior to ordinary dukes. It granted extensive autonomy and privileges. The Privilegium Maius was a complete fabrication. Rudolf had it forged to enhance Habsburg status. The Emperor Charles IV, when shown the document, immediately recognized it as fake and refused to confirm it. However, Rudolf continued using the Archduke title anyway, and his successors did likewise. Eventually, through persistence and the fading of living memory, the title became accepted. By the 15th century, Austrian rulers were routinely called archdukes, and the Privilegium Maius was treated as authentic. Rudolf also founded the University of Vienna in 1365, modeled on the University of Paris. This was the first university in the German-speaking parts of the empire. The university attracted scholars, enhanced Vienna's cultural prestige, and provided trained administrators for Habsburg governance. Rudolf began construction on the Gothic nave of St. Stephen's Cathedral in Vienna, transforming it from a modest church into an architectural monument. These cultural initiatives established Vienna as a major European city, rather than merely a frontier capital. The 14th century brought recurring crises. The Black Death reached Austria in 1348, killing perhaps a third of the population. Repeated outbreaks over subsequent decades prevented population recovery. The labor shortage caused by massive mortality gave surviving peasants bargaining power, forcing nobles to offer better terms or watch workers migrate to areas with more favorable conditions. Urban economies suffered as markets contracted and trade declined. Political instability compounded these problems. The Habsburgs faced challenges from the Wittelsbachs of Bavaria, the Luxembourgs of Bohemia, and the Swiss Confederacy to their west. The Swiss conflict was particularly significant. Habsburg ancestral lands in Switzerland rebelled against ducal authority, forming alliances that eventually became the Swiss Confederation. Despite repeated military campaigns, the Habsburgs could not suppress Swiss independence. By the early 15th century, they had effectively lost their original homeland, though they retained the family name and focused their energies on their Austrian territories. Duke Frederick III, who became Emperor Frederick III in 1440, exemplified the Habsburg patience strategy. Frederick reigned as Duke from 1457 and as Emperor from 1440 until his death in 1493. One of the longest reigns in European history. He was not an impressive military leader. He lost battles, failed to defend Vienna against Hungarian invasion, and allowed rival powers to encroach on Habsburg territories. What Frederick understood was legitimacy and continuity. He meticulously pursued legal claims, no matter how weak, and waited for circumstances to favor Habsburg interests. He cultivated relationships with potential allies and heirs across Europe. He arranged marriages for his children with extraordinary care, thinking generations ahead. Frederick adopted the mysterious motto A-E-I-O-U, which appeared on buildings, documents, and personal items throughout his reign. The motto's meaning was deliberately ambiguous. Contemporary interpretations included Austriae est imperare orbi universo, Austria is destined to rule the whole world, and Alles Erdreich ist Österreich untertan, all the earth is subject to Austria. These grandiose claims seemed absurd given Frederick's actual military weakness, but they expressed Habsburg ambitions perfectly. The Burgundian inheritance immediately faced challenges. King Louis XI of France refused to recognize Habsburg control over territories he considered rightfully French. Burgundy proper, the duchy from which the state took its name, had been a French fief. Louis argued that when Charles the Bold died, the duchy should revert to the French crown rather than pass to his daughter. He sent armies to occupy Burgundian territories, seizing the Duchy of Burgundy itself and threatening the Low Countries. Maximilian found himself at war with France within months of his marriage. He was an untested young prince facing one of Europe's most powerful kingdoms. The French armies were larger, better funded, and commanded by experienced generals. The Burgundian territories themselves were politically divided. The cities of Flanders and Brabant, Ghent, Bruges, Brussels, Antwerp, were wealthy but fiercely independent. They had functioning representative assemblies that controlled taxation and jealously guarded their privileges. These cities supported Maximilian only conditionally, demanding concessions in exchange for military funding. Maximilian proved to be a capable military commander, despite his youth. He won a significant victory at the Battle of Guinegate in 1479 in defeating French forces and temporarily securing the Low Countries. However, the war continued inconclusively for years. Neither side could achieve decisive victory. The conflict drained resources on both sides while accomplishing little. Tragedy struck in March 1482. Mary of Burgundy died from injuries sustained in a riding accident. She was only 25 years old and left two young children, Philip, age 4, and Margaret, age 2. Her death created a succession crisis. Under Burgundian law, Philip inherited his mother's territories, but a 4-year-old could not govern. Maximilian claimed the regency as Philip's father, but the Burgundian estates, the representative assemblies of the various territories, contested this claim, when they argued that regency should be exercised by the estates themselves or by nobles appointed by them, not by a foreign prince. The struggle between Maximilian and the Burgundian estates lasted for years. The cities of Flanders, particularly Ghent and Bruges, effectively imprisoned Maximilian at various points, forcing him to make concessions to their demands. They saw him as an Austrian interloper, trying to impose centralized control over their traditional liberties. Maximilian, for his part, needed Burgundian revenues to fund wars with France and to support his position in the empire. The compromise that eventually emerged gave Maximilian control over the Low Countries in practice, while requiring him to respect local privileges and govern through negotiation with the estates. This experience taught Maximilian important lessons about managing diverse territories with strong local institutions, lessons he would apply to governing the expanding Habsburg domains. Despite these challenges, Maximilian maintained control of most Burgundian territories. France retained the Duchy of Burgundy proper and some adjacent territories, but the wealthy Low Countries, Flanders, Brabant, Holland, Zeeland, and other provinces, remained Habsburg possessions. These provinces generated enormous tax revenues from commerce and manufacturing. The textile industries of Flanders, the banking houses of Antwerp, and the North Sea fisheries created wealth that far exceeded agricultural revenues from traditional feudal territories. Maximilian became Holy Roman Emperor in 1508 after years of complex maneuvering. Unlike most emperors who were crowned by the Pope in Rome, Maximilian was crowned in Trent without papal participation, calling himself elected Roman emperor rather than waiting for papal coronation. This reflected both the practical difficulties of traveling to Rome during the Italian Wars and the increasing assertion of imperial independence from papal authority. As emperor, Maximilian attempted to reform the empire's governance. He proposed a common tax, a standing imperial army, and a reformed court system. These reforms largely failed due to resistance from the territorial princes who valued their independence. However, Maximilian did establish the imperial chamber court, a supreme judicial body for the empire, and created a more structured system for imperial governance, even if he could not overcome princely resistance to centralization. His most consequential achievement was dynastic planning. Maximilian understood that the scattered Habsburg territories, Austria, Tyrol, the Low Countries, and various smaller holdings, could become the foundation for something far greater through strategic marriages. He arranged marriages for his children and grandchildren with a level of strategic calculation unprecedented, even by Habsburg standards. The crucial marriage was arranged in 1596. Maximilian's son Philip, now a young man, married Joanna, daughter of Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile. Ferdinand and Isabella were the Catholic monarchs who had recently unified Spain through their marriage, completed the Reconquista by conquering Granada, and sponsored Columbus's voyages to the Americas. Their daughter Joanna was not the immediate heir. She had an older brother, John. But she was a princess of the most dynamic kingdom in Europe. This created a double alliance. Philip married Joanna, while Philip's sister Margaret married Joanna's brother John. Such double marriages reinforced alliances by creating reciprocal bonds. However, tragedy intervened in ways no one anticipated. John died in 1497 at age 19, shortly after marrying Margaret. Joanna's older sister Isabella then became heir to Castile and Aragon, but she died in 1504. Suddenly, Joanna was the heir to the Spanish kingdoms. The implications were staggering. When Ferdinand and Isabella died, their kingdoms would pass to Joanna. When Maximilian died, the Habsburg lands would pass to Philip, Joanna's husband. This meant Philip and Joanna's son Charles, Maximilian's grandson, would inherit both Spain and the Habsburg domains. The marriage alliance, arranged to create friendship between two powerful dynasties, would instead unite them under a single heir. Maximilian recognized this possibility and cultivated his grandson carefully. Charles was born in 1500 in Ghent and raised in the Low Countries. Maximilian ensured Charles understood his Habsburg heritage and the responsibilities of ruling vast territories. He also worked to secure Charles's eventual election as Holy Roman Emperor, lobbying the electoral princes and building support for Habsburg's succession to the imperial title. Beyond politics, Maximilian cultivated an image as the ideal Renaissance prince, and he was known as the Last Knight, a romantic title reflecting his passion for chivalry, tournaments, and medieval martial culture. Maximilian participated personally in jousts and melees, even as emperor, risking his life in ceremonial combat. He commissioned elaborate armor from the finest craftsmen, some pieces being masterworks of metallurgical art and engineering. Maximilian was also a patron of early printing technology. He commissioned numerous printed works, including autobiographical romances like Teuerdank, that celebrated his adventures in stylized, idealized form. These works were printed with elaborate woodcut illustrations by artists including Albrecht Dürer and Hans Birkmar. Maximilian understood printing's propaganda value, using it to shape his public image and Habsburg prestige. Dürer, and the greatest German artist of the Renaissance, worked extensively for Maximilian. Dürer created woodcuts, engravings, and painted portraits for the emperor. His monumental woodcut Triumphal Arch of Maximilian was a massive printed composition celebrating imperial glory, intended to be assembled from individual sheets into a display over 3 meters tall. This fusion of medieval iconography with cutting-edge printing technology exemplified Maximilian's cultural approach. The emperor also patronized humanist scholars. Humanism, the intellectual movement emphasizing classical learning, rhetoric, and human dignity, was transforming European culture. Maximilian supported humanist scholars at his court, commissioned Latin histories glorifying Habsburg achievements, and encouraged the study of classical texts. The University of Vienna became a center for humanist learning under his patronage. Charles controlled territories on a scale unprecedented in European history since Charlemagne. From his Spanish grandparents, he inherited Castile, Aragon, Navarre, Naples, Sicily, Sardinia, and the rapidly expanding territories in the Americas. From Maximilian, he received the Austrian duchies and the possibility of the imperial crown. From his Burgundian grandmother Mary, he held the Netherlands. When mapped, Charles's domains formed a vast crescent encircling France, extending from Spain through the Low Countries to Austria and south into Italy. The imperial election of 1519 required massive bribery. The 7 electors, the archbishops of Mainz, Trier, and Cologne, the King of Bohemia, the Count Palatine of the Rhine, and the Duke of Saxony, and the Margrave of Brandenburg, had to be convinced to choose Charles over his main rival, King Francis I of France. Charles borrowed enormous sums from the Fugger banking house to finance payments to the electors. The amounts involved were staggering, over 850,000 florins in loans and bribes. Charles won the election, becoming Emperor Charles V, but began his reign heavily indebted. Managing this empire proved impossible from any single location. Charles spent his entire reign traveling between his various territories, never establishing a permanent capital. He was in Spain for approximately 15 years of his 40-year reign, in the Low Countries for 10 years, in Germany for 9 years, and in Italy for 6 years. The rest of his time was spent traveling between these regions, and this constant movement meant Charles could address immediate crises, but prevented systematic governance reform. The rivalry with France dominated Charles's foreign policy. Francis I, having lost the imperial election, sought to break Habsburg encirclement. The resulting wars, known collectively as the Italian Wars, lasted for decades with periodic truces and renewals. The conflict centered on control of Italian territories, particularly Milan and Naples, but extended to fighting in the Low Countries and along the Spanish-French border. The Battle of Pavia in 1525 marked a dramatic Habsburg victory. Imperial forces defeated the French army decisively and captured King Francis himself. He was imprisoned in Spain for a year before agreeing to the Treaty of Madrid, which required him to renounce claims to Italian territories and cede Burgundy to Charles. However, Francis repudiated the treaty immediately after his release, arguing it was signed under duress, and the wars resumed. The most shocking episode occurred in May 1527, when imperial troops sacked Rome. Charles's army in Italy, unpaid for months and mutinous, marched on Rome and subjected it to weeks of pillaging, murder, and destruction. Pope Clement VII, who had allied with France against Charles, took refuge in Castel Sant'Angelo while imperial soldiers looted churches, palaces, and homes. The sack of Rome horrified Catholic Europe and damaged Charles's reputation despite his claims that the attack was unauthorized. The Ottoman Empire presented an even graver threat. Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, Duchy, who ruled from 1520 to 1566, commanded resources and military forces that exceeded any European power. The Ottomans controlled the Balkans, threatened Hungary, and launched naval operations throughout the Mediterranean. Their expansion directly threatened Habsburg territories in Austria and Italy. In 1526, the Ottomans destroyed the Hungarian army at the Battle of Mohacs, killing King Louis II of Hungary. This created a succession crisis because Louis had no heirs. Charles's brother Ferdinand claimed the Hungarian throne through marriage to Louis's sister Anna. However, a rival Hungarian faction elected John Zápolya as king, and Sultan Suleiman supported Zápolya to maintain division and Ottoman influence. Hungary became a contested territory divided between Habsburg, Ottoman, and Zápolya-controlled regions. The religious crisis posed challenges as severe as external wars. Martin Luther published his 95 Theses in 1517, criticizing church practices and doctrine. This sparked the Protestant Reformation, which rapidly spread across Germany and beyond. Luther's ideas found support among various German princes, urban populations, and peasants who had diverse grievances against the church and imperial authority. Charles, as Holy Roman Emperor and a devout Catholic, sought to suppress Protestant teachings. He summoned Luther to the Diet of Worms in 1521, where Luther refused to recant his writings. Charles issued the Edict of Worms, declaring Luther a heretic and outlaw. But enforcement proved impossible. Several German princes protected Luther and other reformers, seeing political advantages in religious independence from both Rome and the emperor. The Schmalkaldic League, formed in 1531, united Protestant princes and cities for mutual defense against imperial attempts to suppress Protestantism. This created an organized military opposition within the empire itself. Charles could not wage war against German princes while simultaneously fighting France and the Ottomans. Religious conflict merged with political rivalries as Catholic and Protestant princes used theological disputes to justify territorial ambitions and resistance to imperial authority. Charles's victory over the Schmalkaldic League at the Battle of Mühlberg in 1547 was militarily decisive but politically hollow. He captured the Protestant leaders and imposed the Augsburg Interim, a temporary religious settlement favoring Catholic positions. Protestant resistance intensified rather than collapsed. Some Protestant princes allied with France against Charles, prioritizing political interests over religious solidarity. The resulting war exhausted imperial resources and achieved nothing lasting. The Peace of Augsburg in 1555 finally established a religious settlement. It enshrined the principle cuius regio, ius religio, whose realm, his religion. Each prince could determine whether his territory would be Catholic or Lutheran. Subjects who disagreed could emigrate. Calvinism and other Protestant variants were not recognized. Only Lutheranism and Catholicism, and this settlement acknowledged the reality that Charles could not impose religious unity on Germany. In the Low Countries, Charles faced different challenges. The provinces generated enormous revenues, but demanded respect for their traditional liberties. Governance required constant negotiation with provincial estates, urban councils, and local nobility. Charles appointed his aunt Margaret of Austria and later his sister Mary of Hungary as regents to manage daily administration. These capable women maintained Habsburg control while managing the complex political landscape. The Spanish territories, particularly Castile, provided the most reliable support. Castilian nobles and clergy backed Charles's religious and political goals. There were the silver flowing from American mines, particularly after the discovery of the Potosi Silver Mountain in 1545. provided crucial revenues. However, even Spanish support had limits. The Castilian Revolt of 1520 to 1522, triggered by taxation demands and Charles's foreign orientation, demonstrated that even his Spanish subjects would resist if pressed too hard. Charles's personal burdens were immense. He suffered from gout, which grew progressively worse, eventually leaving him unable to walk without assistance. The constant travel and stress of managing multiple simultaneous crises damaged his health. He delegated authority to his brother Ferdinand in Austrian and German affairs from the 1520s onward, increasingly relying on Ferdinand to manage the eastern territories and imperial administration. The Ottoman threat materialized immediately after Ferdinand assumed control of the Austrian territories. Sultan Suleiman viewed Ferdinand's claim to the Hungarian crown as illegitimate interference in Ottoman sphere of influence. Hungary's strategic position made it critical to both empires. For the Ottomans, it was the gateway to Central Europe. For the Habsburgs, it was the buffer protecting Vienna and the Austrian heartland. Suleiman assembled a massive army in the spring of 1529. Ottoman sources claim the force numbered over 120,000 soldiers, including the elite Janissary infantry and thousands of cavalry. Modern historians estimate the actual combat force was probably between 80,000 and 100,000 men. Still an enormous army by 16th century standards. The force included siege engineers, artillery trains, and support personnel. The army marched from Istanbul in late April, following the traditional invasion route through the Balkans and into Hungary. Progress was slower than Suleiman anticipated due to unusually heavy rains that turned roads into mud and swelled rivers beyond normal levels. The artillery train, essential for besieging fortified cities, became mired repeatedly. Bridges washed out, forcing time-consuming detours. The weather that delayed the Ottomans would ultimately save Vienna. The Ottomans reached Vienna in late September. The city's garrison numbered approximately 17,000 soldiers, a mix of Spanish and German infantry, Austrian troops, and armed citizens. The fortifications were medieval walls that had not been modernized for artillery warfare. The defensive commander was Count Nicholas Salm, an experienced soldier who organized the defense with whatever resources were available. Vienna's population at this time was approximately 20,000. When the Ottoman army appeared, most civilians had already fled or been evacuated. Those who remained helped with defensive preparations, digging earthworks, moving supplies, and preparing for siege conditions. Suleiman's forces surrounded the city and began siege operations on September 27th. Ottoman engineers dug approach trenches, positioned artillery, and prepared for mining operations, tunneling under walls to collapse them with explosives. And the Janissaries launched probing attacks to test defenses and identify weak points. The defenders faced severe disadvantages. They were outnumbered approximately 5 to 1. They had limited artillery and ammunition. Starvation was a real possibility if the siege lasted months. However, they also had advantages: strong motivation, experienced leadership, and the knowledge that relief was coming. Ferdinand was assembling an army, though its arrival time was uncertain. The siege lasted approximately 3 weeks. Ottoman forces launched multiple major assaults, particularly targeting the sections of wall weakened by mining operations. The Janissaries breached the walls in several places, but were repulsed in brutal close-quarters fighting. Casualties on both sides were heavy. The defenders used primitive grenades, boiling oil, and hand-to-hand combat to throw back attackers who penetrated the defenses. By mid-October, Suleiman faced a critical decision. Winter was approaching. His supply line stretched hundreds of miles through potentially hostile territory. The rains continued, making movement increasingly difficult. His forces had suffered significant casualties for minimal gain. Intelligence reported that Ferdinand's relief army was approaching, though it was actually still weeks away. On October 15th, Suleiman ordered withdrawal. The decision was pragmatic rather than military necessity. The Ottomans had not been defeated in battle, but continuing the siege risked the entire army if winter storms trapped them far from Ottoman territory. The withdrawal was orderly, with the Ottomans burning and pillaging the surrounding countryside as they retreated. And Vienna had survived, but barely. The walls were damaged, supplies nearly exhausted, and casualties among defenders exceeded 30%. Count Salm died from injuries sustained during the siege. The city's survival was due partly to effective defense, partly to weather delays that shortened the siege, and partly to Ottoman caution about overextending supply lines. The failure at Vienna did not end Ottoman pressure. For over a century, the Habsburg-Ottoman frontier remained active with near-constant low-intensity warfare. Neither side could achieve decisive victory, but neither could afford to reduce military vigilance. The frontier zone, called the military border or Militärgrenze, became a permanent defensive system. This was not a simple borderline, but a militarized zone stretching from the Adriatic to Transylvania, in depth varying from 20 to 100 kilometers. The population consisted of soldier farmers who received land grants in exchange for perpetual military service. These communities maintained constant readiness, performed patrol duty, and responded to Ottoman raids. The military border communities included Croats, Serbs, and other South Slavic peoples who fled Ottoman-controlled territories. The Habsburgs granted them settlement rights, religious freedom, and military organization under their own officers. This created loyal military populations defending territories they now called home against the empire they had fled. Warfare in this zone was brutal and continuous. Neither side conducted major campaigns annually, but raiding, skirmishing, and small-scale sieges occurred constantly. Ottoman forces would raid across the border, on us capturing slaves and livestock. Habsburg forces would launch retaliatory expeditions. Fortresses changed hands repeatedly. Entire villages were destroyed or depopulated. This grinding warfare continued for generations. The stalemate persisted through the late 16th and 17th centuries. Both empires faced internal challenges that prevented concentrating full resources on the frontier. The Habsburgs dealt with the 30 Years' War in Germany and rebellions in Bohemia. The Ottomans faced Persian wars, internal court intrigues, and administrative decay. By 1683, circumstances had changed significantly. The Ottoman Empire, though still powerful, showed signs of institutional weakening. Military reforms had stalled. Corruption permeated the administration. However, their Grand Vizier, or Kara Mustafa, believed a decisive campaign could restore Ottoman prestige and solve financial problems through plunder and territorial gains. Kara Mustafa assembled an army that dwarfed Suleiman's force from 1529. The besieging force around Vienna in 1683 numbered approximately 150,000 to 200,000 soldiers, including combat troops, siege specialists, and support personnel. This was possibly the largest army the Ottoman Empire ever assembled for a single campaign. The army marched through Hungary in the spring of 1683, encountering minimal resistance. The Ottomans had learned from previous campaigns, and moving earlier in the season and bringing comprehensive siege equipment, including hundreds of artillery pieces and engineering units specifically trained in siege warfare. Vienna's fortifications had been modernized since 1529. The walls were lower and thicker, designed to resist artillery bombardment. Bastions projected at angles, allowing defenders to fire along the walls. The garrison numbered approximately 11,000 professional soldiers plus armed civilians, totaling perhaps 15,000 defenders. Count Ernst Rüdiger von Starhemberg commanded the defense. The siege began on July 14th. Ottoman forces completely surrounded the city, cutting it off from resupply. They established massive siege works, digging parallel trenches and approached saps toward the walls. Artillery bombardment began immediately, with hundreds of cannons firing continuously. The defenders responded with their own artillery, but were vastly outgunned. Ottoman mining operations proved especially dangerous. Engineers dug extensive tunnel systems under the fortifications, packing chambers with explosives. When detonated, these mines collapsed wall sections and created breaches for assault troops. The defenders conducted counter-mining operations, digging their own tunnels to intercept Ottoman mines or collapse them prematurely. The siege lasted 2 months. Fighting was continuous and exhausting. The Janissaries launched major assaults repeatedly, particularly after successful mining operations created breaches. The defenders fought with desperation, knowing that if the city fell, its population faced massacre or slavery. But a disease spread through the crowded city. Food supplies dwindled. By early September, the situation was critical. The walls were extensively damaged, ammunition was running low, and defender casualties were severe. Emperor Leopold I had fled Vienna before the siege began, moving to Passau and then Linz. He appealed urgently to other European powers for assistance. Pope Innocent XI helped broker a relief coalition, including Polish, German, and Austrian forces. The most significant contingent came from Poland. King John Sobieski of Poland marched to Vienna's relief with approximately 18,000 Polish troops, including the famous Polish hussars, heavy cavalry wearing distinctive winged armor. German princes contributed approximately 13,000 soldiers. Austrian forces gathered another approximately 30,000. This combined relief army totaled approximately 65,000 soldiers, still significantly outnumbered by Ottoman forces, but adequate for a decisive battle. The relief army assembled on the heights northwest of Vienna, the Kahlenberg Hills overlooking the city and the Ottoman siege lines. On September 12, 1683, the coalition forces attacked. Sobieski commanded the overall operation, coordinating a massive cavalry charge down the slopes toward the Ottoman positions. The Battle of Vienna was one of the largest cavalry engagements in European history. The Polish hussars led the charge, followed by German and Austrian cavalry units. The combined force of approximately 20,000 horsemen crashed into the Ottoman lines, which were unprepared for attack from this direction. Ottoman forces had focused on the city siege, not on defending against field armies. The Ottoman lines collapsed. Kara Mustafa attempted to rally his forces, but panic spread through the camps. The discipline that made Ottoman armies formidable in offensive operations failed under unexpected pressure. Soldiers abandoned positions, siege equipment, and supplies in chaotic retreat. The relief army pursued, turning withdrawal into rout. The Habsburg counteroffensive began within weeks of Vienna's relief. Imperial forces, emboldened by victory and joined by German and Polish allies, pushed into Hungary. The campaign was not a single decisive war, but a series of interconnected conflicts lasting 16 years, collectively called the Great Turkish War. Prince Eugene of Savoy emerged as the campaign's most brilliant commander. Eugene was an unlikely military leader. Born in France, rejected for service by King Louis XIV, he entered Habsburg service and proved to be a tactical genius. His victory at the Battle of Zenta in 1697 was devastating for Ottoman forces. Eugene caught the Ottoman army crossing the Tisza River and destroyed it methodically, killing over 20,000 soldiers and capturing the Sultan's treasury and harem. This defeat forced the Ottomans to negotiate. The Treaty of Karlowitz in 1699 formalized massive territorial transfers. The Habsburgs acquired nearly all of Hungary, including Transylvania, plus Croatia and Slavonia. This roughly doubled the territory under direct Habsburg control. Venice received territories in Greece and Dalmatia. Poland recovered portions of Ukraine. For the first time in centuries, the Ottoman Empire ceded substantial territory rather than expanding or holding steady. The newly acquired lands presented immediate administrative challenges. Hungary had been under Ottoman rule or contested control for over a century and a half. Ottoman administrative systems had been imposed on some areas, while other regions maintained semi-autonomous arrangements. The population was diverse: Magyars, Germans, Slovaks, Romanians, Serbs, Croats, and others. Religious divisions added complexity. Catholics, Protestants of various denominations, Orthodox Christians, and Muslim populations in areas of recent Ottoman control. The Habsburgs initially attempted direct rule, treating Hungary as conquered territory, and they imposed military governors, stationed German-speaking officials in administrative positions, and garrisoned troops throughout the kingdom. The Hungarian nobility resented this treatment, viewing it as violation of historical Hungarian rights and autonomy. The Magyar nobility had traditionally elected their kings and maintained significant self-governance through their diet, the Hungarian parliament. Rebellion erupted under Ferenc Rákóczi II from 1703 to 1711. Rákóczi, a wealthy Hungarian magnate, mobilized tens of thousands of supporters against Habsburg rule. The revolt combined social grievances from peasants with noble resentment of foreign domination. Habsburg forces struggled to suppress the rebellion, which controlled large portions of Hungary and received support from France, and then at war with Austria. The rebellion ended through negotiation rather than military defeat. The Treaty of Szatmár in 1711 offered amnesty to rebels and guaranteed Hungarian noble privileges, religious freedom for Protestants, and recognition of Hungary as a kingdom with constitutional rights rather than a conquered province. The Habsburgs retained the Hungarian crown, but governed through compromise with Magyar elites. This pattern of negotiated autonomy would characterize Habsburg rule over their multinational empire. Unlike absolutist states attempting uniform administration, the Habsburgs governed through overlapping systems respecting local privileges and institutions. Each territory, Austria, Bohemia, Hungary, the Austrian Netherlands, various Italian possessions, had distinct legal frameworks, representative assemblies, and customary rights. Simultaneously, the War of Spanish Succession consumed Habsburg resources and attention. When the last Spanish Habsburg king, Charles II, died childless in 1700, the Spanish throne became Europe's greatest prize. Charles II's will designated Philip of Bourbon, grandson of Louis XIV of France, as heir. This threatened to unite France and Spain under Bourbon control, fundamentally shifting European power balance. Emperor Leopold I claimed the Spanish inheritance for his younger son, the Archduke Charles. The resulting war lasted from 1702 to 1714, involving most European powers. Austria, England, the Netherlands, Portugal, and various German states formed a grand alliance against France and Spain. Eugene of Savoy and the English Duke of Marlborough conducted brilliant coordinated campaigns. Their victory at Blenheim in 1704 saved Vienna from a Franco-Bavarian invasion force. Subsequent victories at Ramillies, Oudenarde, and Malplaquet drove French forces back, but could not achieve total victory. The war reached stalemate. Neither side could deliver a knockout blow. France was exhausted financially and militarily, but held core territories. The Grand Alliance could not sustain offensive operations indefinitely. Political changes transformed the situation. The Archduke Charles became Emperor Charles VI in 1711 when his brother died unexpectedly. If Charles also gained the entire Spanish Empire, Habsburg dominance would exceed even Charles V's territories, in which England and the Netherlands opposed. The Peace of Utrecht in 1713 and subsequent treaties partitioned the Spanish Empire. Philip V received Spain and its American colonies. The Habsburgs gained the Spanish Netherlands, roughly modern Belgium, plus Naples, Sardinia, and Milan in Italy. These Italian and Netherlandish territories added significant wealth and strategic positions, but also created scattered possessions difficult to defend. Emperor Charles VI ruled from 1711 to 1740. He never accepted the loss of Spain, styling himself King of Spain throughout his reign and conducting diplomacy as though he might reclaim the Spanish throne. This was unrealistic nostalgia, but Charles focused Habsburg resources on maintaining prestige and dynastic legitimacy. The Baroque cultural flowering transformed Vienna and other Habsburg cities during this period. Baroque architecture emphasized grandeur, dramatic visual effects, and emotional impact. The style suited absolutist monarchies seeking to demonstrate power through monumental buildings. The Karlskirche in Vienna, begun in 1716, exemplifies Baroque ambition. Charles VI commissioned it to commemorate Vienna's deliverance from plague. The church combines a massive dome, flanking columns imitating Trajan's column in Rome, and a portico suggesting the Pantheon. The interior features elaborate frescoes, sculptures, and architectural details designed to overwhelm viewers with spiritual and imperial grandeur. The Belvedere Palace, built for Eugene of Savoy between 1714 and 1723, demonstrates secular Baroque magnificence. The complex includes two palaces connected by formal gardens with fountains, sculptures, and precisely arranged plantings. The upper palace served for state occasions and art display, while the lower palace was Eugene's residence. The scale proclaimed Eugene's status as empire's greatest military commander and wealthiest noble. Similar architectural projects occurred throughout Habsburg territories. The Schönbrunn Palace outside Vienna was expanded and rebuilt in Baroque style as an imperial summer residence. Monasteries like Melk Abbey were rebuilt as massive Baroque complexes dominating their regions. These buildings served political purposes beyond aesthetics. They demonstrated Habsburg power and provided employment for subjects and created visible symbols of stability and permanence. Music flourished in Vienna during this period. The city attracted composers and performers from across Europe. Court and noble patronage supported musicians, while growing middle-class audiences attended concerts and operas. The foundations were laid for Vienna's reputation as Europe's music capital, though the most famous composers, Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven, would come later. The empire's economy grew substantially. The end of constant warfare with the Ottomans allowed agricultural recovery in Hungary and the Balkans. The fertile Hungarian plains became major grain producers. Wine production expanded. Mining operations in Bohemia and Hungary generated revenues from silver, copper, and iron ore. Trade routes through Habsburg territories connected the Mediterranean with northern Europe, generating customs revenues and commercial activity. However, the empire's structure created inefficiencies. Each territory maintained separate customs barriers, legal systems, and administrative procedures. Moving goods from Austria to the Netherlands required crossing multiple borders with different regulations. Administrative coordination was minimal because each territory's estates and nobility resisted central control. The empire functioned more as a personal union under the Habsburg monarch than as an integrated state. The nobility dominated society across all territories. Great aristocratic families, Esterházy, Lobkowitz, Schwarzenberg, Liechtenstein, Kinsky, controlled vast estates, exercised judicial authority over peasants, and monopolized high administrative and military positions. These nobles owed loyalty to the emperor, but maintained significant autonomy. They intermarried across ethnic lines, creating a cosmopolitan aristocracy that was German-speaking but culturally hybrid. The peasantry, comprising over 80% of the population, lived under conditions varying from relatively free farmers in some Austrian regions to serfs bound to estates in Bohemia and Hungary. Most peasants owed labor service to landlords, paid various feudal dues, and had limited legal rights. Peasant revolts occasionally erupted, but were suppressed violently. The nobility successfully resisted any attempts to improve peasant conditions, viewing such reforms as attacks on property rights. Charles VI's primary concern became succession. He had no surviving sons, only daughters. Under Salic law, which many European kingdoms followed, daughters could not inherit. Austria's various territories had different inheritance laws, some allowing female succession and others prohibiting it. Charles needed to ensure his daughter could inherit all Habsburg territories intact. He promulgated the Pragmatic Sanction in 1713, a legal decree declaring that Habsburg territories were indivisible and could pass to female heirs if the male line ended. Charles spent decades securing acceptance of this decree. He negotiated with each territory's estates, offering concessions in exchange for recognition. He conducted international diplomacy, making territorial and commercial concessions to foreign powers in exchange for guarantees they would respect his daughter's succession. Frederick II of Prussia invaded Silesia on December 16, 1740. Barely 2 months after Charles's death. Silesia was a wealthy province of the Bohemian crown, containing productive farmland, linen manufacturing, and significant mineral resources. Frederick offered no justification beyond opportunity and vague dynastic claims. His attack demonstrated that diplomatic guarantees meant nothing without military force to back them. Bavaria, France, Spain, and Saxony quickly joined the assault on Habsburg territories, each seeking territorial gains or political advantages. Elector Charles Albert of Bavaria claimed the entire Habsburg inheritance through marriage connections, styling himself the rightful heir. France sought to weaken the Habsburgs permanently, and Spain wanted to recover Italian territories lost in previous wars. A coordinated offensive threatened to partition the Habsburg domains entirely. Maria Theresa's situation appeared hopeless. The treasury held minimal reserves. The army was undermanned and poorly equipped after decades of inadequate military spending. Key advisors recommended ceding territories to secure peace. Maria Theresa refused. She personally appealed to the Hungarian Diet in Pressburg in June 1741, appearing before the assembled nobles with her infant son and making an emotional plea for support. The Hungarian nobles, moved by her appeal and aware that Habsburg collapse would leave Hungary vulnerable to external threats, voted to provide substantial military forces. They mobilized the traditional Hungarian levy, approximately 60,000 soldiers, placing them under imperial command. This Hungarian support proved critical to Habsburg's survival, creating a lasting bond between Maria Theresa and Hungarian nobility that would influence Habsburg-Hungarian relations for generations. The War of Austrian Succession lasted 8 years, fought across multiple theaters from Italy to the Netherlands. Austrian forces, supported by Britain and the Dutch Republic, fought against France, Prussia, Bavaria, and Spain. The military campaigns were inconclusive, with neither side achieving decisive victory. Frederick II defeated Austrian forces in Silesia repeatedly, demonstrating Prussian military superiority. Austrian forces successfully defended Bohemia and eventually drove Bavarian and French forces from Austrian territory. The Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle in 1748 ended the war. Maria Theresa retained the vast majority of Habsburg territories. Her husband, Francis Stephen, was elected Holy Roman Emperor, though this was largely symbolic. However, Austria permanently lost Silesia to Prussia. This single territorial loss was economically and strategically devastating. Silesia contained approximately one-third of Bohemia's population and a significant portion of Habsburg industrial and agricultural production. Its loss to Prussia elevated that kingdom from secondary power to major European player. Maria Theresa never accepted the loss of Silesia. She spent the next 8 years reforming her state to prepare for a war of reconquest. The reforms were comprehensive and touched every aspect of government, military, and society. Military reform began immediately. Count Leopold von Daun reorganized the army along modern lines, creating standardized training, improving logistics, and professionalizing the officer corps. The military academy at Wiener Neustadt was established in 1751 to train officers scientifically rather than relying on aristocratic birth. Artillery was standardized and improved. Engineering and support services were professionalized. By the mid-1750s, the Habsburg army was larger, better trained, and more effectively organized than at any previous point. Administrative reform centralized control over taxation and finance. Previously, each territory's estates controlled tax collection and determined what amounts they would contribute to imperial needs. Maria Theresa established a central treasury with authority to assess and collect taxes directly. This required complex negotiations with territorial estates who resisted losing their traditional rights. Maria Theresa offered compromises, respecting local institutions while asserting central authority over finances, that gradually increased state revenues. The tax system was reformed to be more equitable and efficient. Previously, the nobility had been largely exempt from taxation, placing the entire burden on peasants and townspeople. Maria Theresa introduced land taxes that applied to noble estates, though at lower rates than peasant holdings, and this generated significant additional revenue while establishing the principle that even nobles contributed to state finances. Educational reform aimed to create a literate, productive population. Maria Theresa established the first compulsory primary education system in Habsburg territories in 1774. Children aged 6 to 12 were required to attend school, with the state establishing and funding schools in localities that lacked them. The curriculum emphasized basic literacy, numeracy, and Catholic religious instruction. Implementation was gradual and incomplete. Rural areas often lacked schools or teachers, and enforcement was difficult. But the principle of state-provided mass education was revolutionary. The legal system was rationalized through codification of civil and criminal law. Previously, on each territory operated under different legal codes, with some areas using Roman law, others customary Germanic law, and still others following local traditions. Maria Theresa commissioned legal experts to create uniform codes. The criminal code abolished some of the harshest medieval punishments and introduced more systematic judicial procedures, though torture remained legal under certain circumstances until later reforms abolished it. Religious policy under Maria Theresa remained strictly Catholic. Unlike some enlightened rulers who embraced religious toleration, Maria Theresa genuinely believed Catholicism was the only true faith. Protestant worship was suppressed. Jews faced severe restrictions on residence, occupation, and public worship. Conversion to Catholicism was encouraged through incentives and occasional coercion. This religious intolerance contrasted with her otherwise progressive reforms, demonstrating the limits of enlightened absolutism when it conflicted with personal religious convictions. The 7 Years' War, beginning in 1756, was Austria's attempt to recover Silesia. Maria Theresa executed a dramatic diplomatic revolution, allying with France, Austria's traditional enemy, against Prussia. Russia and several German states joined the anti-Prussian coalition. Britain supported Prussia, creating a complex web of alliances that transformed European diplomacy. The war was fought globally, extending to colonial possessions in North America, India, and the Caribbean. In Europe, the main theater was Central Europe, where Austrian, French, and Russian forces attacked Prussia from multiple directions. Frederick II fought brilliantly, winning victories against numerically superior forces through tactical genius and operational mobility. However, Prussia suffered enormous casualties and economic devastation. Austria won significant victories, including the Battle of Kolin in 1757 and the Battle of Hochkirch in 1758. Austrian forces briefly occupied Berlin in 1760. However, Prussia survived through Frederick's military skill, British financial subsidies, and Russia's sudden withdrawal from the war in 1762 when Empress Elizabeth died and was succeeded by Peter III, who admired Frederick and immediately made peace. The Treaty of Hubertusburg in 1763 ended the European War. Despite 7 years of fighting and hundreds of thousands of casualties, the treaty restored the status quo ante bellum. Prussia retained Silesia. Austria gained nothing territorially. The war had demonstrated that Prussia could not be defeated even when surrounded by enemies, establishing it as Austria's permanent rival within the German-speaking world. Maria Theresa's co-rule with her son Joseph II began in 1765 after her husband's death. Joseph became Holy Roman Emperor and co-ruler of Habsburg territories, though Maria Theresa retained ultimate authority until her death. The arrangement created constant tension. Joseph embodied Enlightenment rationalism, believing in reason, reform, and centralization. Maria Theresa was more pragmatic and traditional, valuing stability and gradual change. Joseph pushed for radical reforms that Maria Theresa often moderated or blocked. He wanted to abolish serfdom immediately. She agreed to some limitations on feudal obligations, but protected noble rights. He advocated religious toleration. She maintained Catholic privilege while allowing limited Protestant worship in specific areas. He sought to eliminate unnecessary monasteries and redirect their wealth to productive uses. She permitted some monastery closures, but protected major religious institutions. Vienna's cultural development accelerated during this period. The city became Europe's music capital, attracting composers, performers, and audiences. Christoph Willibald Gluck reformed opera, creating works that emphasized dramatic coherence and emotional truth over mere vocal display. His operas Orfeo ed Eurydice and Alceste established new standards for musical theater. Joseph Haydn, employed by the Esterházy princes, revolutionized instrumental music. He essentially created the classical symphony and string quartet as musical forms, establishing conventions for structure, thematic development, and orchestration that dominated European music for generations. Haydn spent most of his career in the Esterházy palaces outside Vienna, but his music circulated throughout Europe, influencing composers everywhere. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart arrived in Vienna in 1781, having spent his youth touring Europe as a prodigy. Mozart's genius encompassed all musical forms: opera, symphony, concerto, chamber music, sacred music. His operas, The Marriage of Figaro, Don Giovanni, and The Magic Flute, combined dramatic sophistication with musical brilliance. His instrumental works demonstrated unprecedented melodic invention and structural perfection. Mozart struggled financially during his Vienna years, dying in 1791 at age 35. But his output influenced all subsequent Western music. Vienna's opera houses, concert halls, and salons provided venues for this musical activity. The aristocracy and wealthy bourgeoisie patronized musicians, attended performances, and often performed themselves. Music was central to Viennese social life, with private concerts, public performances, and amateur music-making occurring constantly. The visual arts also flourished. The Imperial art collection, begun by earlier Habsburgs, it expanded substantially. The collection included works by Titian, Rubens, Velázquez, and other masters. This would eventually become the basis for the Kunsthistorisches Museum, one of the world's great art collections. Habsburg foreign policy in the late 18th century focused on maintaining the balance of power and seeking territorial gains through diplomacy rather than war. The first partition of Poland in 1772 provided such an opportunity. Poland had weakened through internal divisions and external interference. When Russia and Prussia planned to partition Polish territory, Austria joined to ensure it received a share. Austria acquired Galicia, adding approximately 2.5 million subjects and significant territory, though the region was relatively poor and underdeveloped. And this cynical dismemberment of a neighboring state contradicted Enlightenment principles of international law and national sovereignty. Maria Theresa privately expressed moral qualms, reportedly saying she wept, but she took her share. The partition demonstrated that enlightened absolutism did not extend to respecting weaker states' territorial integrity when political advantage beckoned. Joseph II's solo reign from 1780 to 1790 unleashed reforms that shocked Habsburg territories. He issued the Edict of Toleration in 1781, granting Protestants and Orthodox Christians the right to private worship, build churches, and hold public office. Jews received expanded civil rights, though still faced restrictions. And this religious toleration outraged Catholic clergy and conservatives who viewed it as betraying the faith that legitimized Habsburg rule. The abolition of serfdom in 1781 was even more radical. The serfdom patent freed peasants from personal bondage to landlords, allowing them to marry without noble permission, choose occupations, and move freely. Feudal labor obligations were converted to cash payments. The nobility reacted with fury, seeing this as confiscation of property rights. Peasants welcomed freedom, but found that cash payments could be as burdensome as labor service. And without land ownership, their economic situation improved minimally. Joseph centralized administration aggressively, eliminating regional autonomy and traditional privileges. He made German the official language throughout the empire, requiring all government business to be conducted in German, regardless of local languages. This alienated Hungarians, Czechs, Italians, and other non-German populations who viewed it as cultural suppression. He closed hundreds of monasteries he deemed economically unproductive, confiscating their property for state use. He reformed criminal law, abolishing torture and reducing capital punishment, which was progressive but implemented without consultation or consideration of local legal traditions. These reforms created widespread resentment. When Joseph died in February 1790, Many of his reforms were immediately reversed by his brother and successor, Leopold II. The Hungarian nobility forced Leopold to rescind most changes affecting Hungary. Other territories negotiated restoration of traditional privileges. Franz Joseph's reign demonstrated the limits of enlightened absolutism imposed from above, without building political support or allowing gradual adaptation. Leopold II died in March 1792 after reigning barely 2 years. His son Francis II inherited an empire in flux. Within months, revolutionary France declared war on Austria, beginning conflicts that would last, with brief interruptions, until 1815. The French Revolution had overthrown the monarchy, executed King Louis XVI in January 1793, and established a republic. Marie Antoinette, Louis's executed queen, was Francis's aunt. The revolutionaries proclaimed universal rights and popular sovereignty, challenging the legitimacy of all monarchical governments. Austria joined Prussia and other powers in attempting to suppress the revolution and restore monarchy in France. The wars began disastrously for Austria. French revolutionary armies, motivated by ideological fervor and employing new tactical doctrines, defeated Austrian forces repeatedly. Austria lost the Austrian Netherlands, modern Belgium, which France annexed. Northern Italy, where Austria controlled Milan, Mantua, and other territories, became a primary battleground. French General Napoleon Bonaparte led campaigns that drove Austrian forces from Italy, captured key fortresses, and threatened Austria itself. Napoleon negotiated the Treaty of Campo Formio in October 1797 directly with Austria, bypassing other coalition members. Austria ceded the Austrian Netherlands and recognized French control of northern Italy. In compensation, Austria received Venice and its territories, ending the 1,000-year-old Venetian Republic. This treaty demonstrated Napoleon's diplomatic skill and Austria's military weakness. Peace lasted barely 2 years. War resumed in 1799, with Austria joining a second coalition against France. Austrian forces initially succeeded, recovering northern Italy. But Napoleon returned from Egypt, seized power in France, and launched a counter-offensive. His victory at Marengo in June 1800 drove Austria from Italy again. The Treaty of Lunéville in February 1801 forced Austria to cede territories west of the Rhine and recognize French dominance in Italy. The Holy Roman Empire was visibly disintegrating. For centuries, the empire had been a complex federation of hundreds of territories. Kingdoms, duchies, bishoprics, free cities, and counties. Nominally under the emperor's authority, but largely autonomous. Napoleon exploited this fragmentation, allying with medium-sized German states like Bavaria, Württemberg, and Baden, offering them territorial gains and elevated status in exchange for supporting France. The Imperial recess of 1803, formally ending compensation disputes from earlier territorial losses, fundamentally restructured Germany. Hundreds of small ecclesiastical principalities and free cities were abolished, their territories distributed to larger states. The archbishoprics of Cologne, Mainz, and Trier lost temporal power, while dozens of imperial free cities were mediatized, absorbed into larger states. This consolidation strengthened medium-sized German states while weakening imperial institutions. Francis recognized that the Holy Roman Empire was doomed. When Napoleon created the Confederation of the Rhine in July 1806, a French-dominated alliance of German states that formally seceded from the empire, Francis faced reality. On August 6, 1806, he proclaimed the dissolution of the Holy Roman Empire. An institution lasting over 1,000 years, claiming descent from Charlemagne and ancient Rome, ceased to exist through a single decree. Francis had already prepared for this outcome. In August 1804, he had proclaimed himself Francis I, Emperor of Austria, and this created a new imperial title based solely on hereditary Habsburg lands rather than the elective Holy Roman Crown. The Austrian Empire included the German-speaking duchies, Bohemia, Hungary, Galicia, northern Italy, and various other territories. Francis thus retained an imperial title while acknowledging that the old Universal Empire was dead. The War of the Third Coalition in 1805 brought Austria's worst military disaster. Austrian and Russian forces confronted Napoleon's Grande Armée at Austerlitz in Moravia on December 2nd. Napoleon commanded approximately 73,000 soldiers. The Allies fielded approximately 85,000. Napoleon deliberately weakened his right flank, luring the Allies into attacking there while he concentrated forces for a devastating thrust through their center. The battle was a masterpiece of tactical planning. The Allied army collapsed, suffering approximately 15,000 killed and wounded and 12,000 captured. Austrian and Russian casualties combined totaled over a third of their forces. Emperor Francis and Russian Tsar Alexander personally witnessed their army's destruction. The Treaty of Pressburg, signed later in December, stripped Austria of extensive territories. Austria ceded Venetia to Napoleon's Kingdom of Italy, Tyrol and Vorarlberg to Bavaria, and various territories to other German allies of France. Austria paid massive war indemnities. The treaty reduced Austria's population by approximately 3 million and eliminated its Italian presence outside of Lombardy. War resumed in 1809. Austria hoped that Napoleon's difficulties in Spain would provide an opportunity for revenge. Archduke Charles, Austria's most capable commander, defeated Napoleon at Aspern-Essling in May 1809, demonstrating that Napoleon was not invincible. However, Napoleon recovered quickly, bringing reinforcements and defeating Austria decisively at Wagram in July. The Treaty of Schönbrunn in October 1809 imposed further losses. Austria ceded additional territories to Bavaria, the Grand Duchy of Warsaw, Napoleon's Polish satellite state, and France directly. Austrian military forces were limited to 150,000 soldiers. The war indemnity exceeded 85 million francs, a crushing financial burden. Count Clemens von Metternich, appointed Austrian foreign minister in 1809, and recognized that military resistance was futile. Austria needed to accommodate French dominance while preserving core territories and waiting for opportunities. Metternich was a conservative diplomat who believed in balance of power, dynastic legitimacy, and gradual change. He concluded that Austria's survival required a temporary alliance with France. Metternich proposed a marriage alliance. Napoleon had divorced his first wife Josephine because she bore him no children, and he desperately wanted an heir. Metternich offered the Archduchess Marie-Louise, daughter of Emperor Francis, age 18. Napoleon accepted enthusiastically. Marriage to a Habsburg princess provided legitimacy for his upstart dynasty and integrated him into European royalty. The marriage occurred in April 1810. Marie-Louise, who had been raised to hate Napoleon as the monster who had humiliated Austria repeatedly, had no choice in the matter. She married Napoleon in a lavish ceremony and bore him a son, Napoleon II, in March 1811. The boy was given the title King of Rome, evoking imperial traditions. This marriage alliance served Austrian interests by temporarily ensuring peace and giving Austria influence at Napoleon's court. It also positioned Austria carefully, allied with France but not fully committed, preserving options for future realignment. Napoleon's invasion of Russia in June 1812 provided that opportunity. Napoleon assembled approximately 600,000 soldiers for the campaign, including Austrian and Prussian contingents. The Russian campaign proved catastrophic. Napoleon reached Moscow, but the Russians refused to make peace. Winter came early. The Grande Armée retreated through freezing conditions, hunger, and constant Russian attacks. Perhaps 50,000 soldiers returned from the campaign. Napoleon's military power was shattered. Metternich initially maintained neutrality, then mediated between France and its enemies, then finally joined the Sixth Coalition against Napoleon in August 1813. This carefully timed entry allowed Austria to claim a role in Napoleon's defeat while avoiding the worst fighting. The Battle of Leipzig in October 1813, called the Battle of Nations, involved over 500,000 soldiers from multiple armies. Napoleon was defeated decisively and forced to retreat to France. The coalition invaded France in early 1814. Napoleon fought brilliantly with inadequate forces, but could not prevent Allied advance. Paris fell in March. Napoleon abdicated in April and was exiled to Elba, a small Mediterranean island. The Bourbon monarchy was restored in France under Louis XVIII. Metternich organized the Congress of Vienna, beginning in September 1814, to reconstruct the European political order. The Congress brought together representatives from all European powers to negotiate a comprehensive peace settlement. The proceedings were famously interrupted by Napoleon's return from Elba in March 1815. But after his final defeat at Waterloo in June, the Congress concluded its work. The settlement aimed to create a stable balance of power that would prevent future revolutionary upheavals and major wars. France was treated relatively leniently, restored to roughly its 1789 borders with moderate indemnities. The goal was to make France a conservative, satisfied power rather than creating permanent resentment. Austria gained significant territories. Lombardy and Venetia in northern Italy were combined into the Kingdom of Lombardy-Venetia under Austrian control. Austria also gained territories in Dalmatia and regained Tyrol and the Salzburg region. These acquisitions made Austria the dominant power in Italy and reinforced its position in Central Europe. The German states were organized into the German Confederation, a loose association of 39 states. Austria held the permanent presidency of the Confederation Diet, giving it leadership of the German-speaking world. This arrangement balanced Austrian leadership with significant independence for member states, particularly Prussia, which remained a formidable rival. Metternich implemented comprehensive systems to suppress dissent and prevent revolutionary ideas from spreading. The Carlsbad Decrees of 1819 established censorship throughout the German Confederation. Universities were placed under surveillance, with government officials monitoring lectures and student organizations. Professors suspected of liberal sympathies were dismissed. Student fraternities promoting German nationalism or constitutional government were banned. In Austrian territories, censorship extended to virtually all printed material. Books, newspapers, pamphlets, and even sheet music required approval before publication. Censors evaluated content for political subversion, religious heterodoxy, or moral impropriety. Foreign publications were screened at borders. Possession of banned materials could lead to imprisonment. The system was thorough, but not omnipotent. Contraband literature circulated through underground networks, and Austrians traveling abroad encountered ideas their government sought to suppress. The secret police monitored potential opposition. Informants reported on private conversations, letters were opened and read, and surveillance targeted intellectuals, students, and anyone suspected of liberal or nationalist sympathies. The police apparatus was smaller and less technologically sophisticated than 20th-century totalitarian systems. but it created an atmosphere of caution where people avoided discussing politics openly, and this repression coexisted with cultural vitality. Vienna remained a center of music, theater, and arts. Franz Schubert composed intimate songs and chamber music, exploring emotional depths. The Biedermeier style in furniture and decorative arts emphasized comfortable domesticity. Viennese coffeehouse culture flourished, providing spaces for conversation, reading, and socializing. Though political topics were carefully avoided or discussed obliquely, economic development proceeded unevenly. Railways began connecting major cities in the 1830s and 1840s. The Emperor Ferdinand Northern Railway linked Vienna to Bohemia and Galicia. Industrialization concentrated in Bohemia, where textile manufacturing and coal mining expanded. The Skoda works in Pilsen became a major industrial enterprise. However, most of the empire remained agricultural, with peasants working under conditions barely changed since medieval times despite the formal abolition of serfdom. Nationalism emerged as the dominant ideological force threatening the empire's existence. Italian nationalism sought to unite the Italian peninsula into a single nation-state, requiring the expulsion of Austrian control from Lombardy-Venetia. Hungarian nationalism demanded restoration of Hungarian autonomy and constitutional rights. Czech nationalism sought recognition of Czech language and culture within Bohemia. German nationalism posed a different challenge. Should Austria's German-speaking territories join a unified Germany or remain separate within the multinational empire? The revolutions of 1848 began in Paris in February, when King Louis-Philippe was overthrown and the Second French Republic proclaimed. Revolutionary fervor spread rapidly across Europe. News from Paris reached Vienna within days. Students and workers demonstrated, demanding constitutional government, freedom of the press, and Metternich's dismissal. On March 13th, crowds gathered in Vienna demanding reforms. Violence erupted when troops fired on demonstrators, killing several people. The situation spiraled beyond government control. Metternich recognized his position was untenable and resigned that evening, fleeing Vienna in disguise. His departure after nearly 40 years dominating Austrian policy symbolized the old order's collapse. Emperor Ferdinand, mentally incapacitated and incapable of decisive leadership, granted a constitution under pressure. The court fled Vienna for Innsbruck, then to Prague as the capital descended into chaos. Revolutionary movements erupted simultaneously across the empire. In Budapest, Hungarian liberals led by Lajos Kossuth demanded autonomy and constitutional government. In Prague, Czech leaders organized a Pan-Slav Congress, calling for federal reorganization respecting Slavic nationalities. In Milan and Venice, Italians rose against Austrian rule, proclaiming republics and expelling Austrian garrisons. The empire appeared to be disintegrating. Radicals in Vienna demanded social reforms, including workers' rights and land redistribution. The Hungarian Diet passed the April Laws, transforming Hungary into a virtually independent kingdom, maintaining only personal union through the monarch. Italian revolutionaries unified their efforts, creating coordinated resistance against Austrian forces. The Habsburg counteroffensive began in June. Field Marshal Radetzky, commanding Austrian forces in Italy despite being 81 years old, defeated the Piedmontese at the Battle of Custoza in July, crushing the Italian revolt in Lombardy. Prague was bombarded and occupied in June after Czech radicals attempted to seize control. By autumn, Imperial forces had recovered their confidence and begun systematic reconquest. In October, Vienna itself rose again in radical revolt. Workers and students built barricades, fought government troops, and proclaimed a revolutionary government. The response was overwhelming force. Field Marshal Windesgratz besieged Vienna with 50,000 troops and artillery. After fierce street fighting, the city was subdued. Revolutionary leaders were executed. The suppression was brutal, designed to crush resistance permanently. The court recognized that Ferdinand's incapacity prevented effective leadership. On December 2, 1848, Ferdinand was persuaded to abdicate in favor of his nephew, Franz Joseph. The new emperor was 18 years old, intelligent but inexperienced, conservative by instinct, and determined to restore imperial authority. Franz Joseph's first priority was suppressing the Hungarian Revolution. Hungarian forces under Kossuth had achieved remarkable success, defeating Austrian armies and proclaiming Hungarian independence in April 1849. The Hungarian military, drawing on traditions of cavalry warfare and commanded by capable generals, proved formidable opponents. Franz Joseph requested assistance from Russia. Tsar Nicholas I, alarmed by revolutionary movements threatening monarchical legitimacy everywhere, sent nearly 200,000 Russian troops to invade Hungary from the north. Caught between Austrian forces from the west and Russian armies from the east, Hungarian resistance collapsed. Kossuth fled into exile. The Austrian commander, General Haynau, executed 13 Hungarian generals and numerous other revolutionary leaders. Hungary was placed under direct military rule, its constitution abolished, and its autonomy eliminated. This restoration came at a cost. The brutal suppression created lasting Hungarian resentment. The reliance on Russian military intervention demonstrated Austrian weakness and created a debt to Russia that would influence future policy. The revolution's failure did not eliminate the underlying tensions. National aspirations, demands for constitutional government, and social inequalities that had produced it. Franz Joseph governed as an absolute monarch, rejecting constitutionalism and centralization. He worked extraordinarily hard, personally reviewing vast amounts of administrative detail. His daily routine began early and continued late, with hours devoted to reading reports, meeting ministers, and making decisions. This dedication to duty was admirable but inefficient. The emperor became a bottleneck in governance, with decisions delayed while he reviewed minutiae. Austria's diplomatic position deteriorated during the Crimean War of 1853 through 1856. Russia expected Austrian support, or at least neutrality given Russian assistance, in 1849. Austria instead pursued its own interests, threatening Russia and ultimately allying with France and Britain diplomatically while avoiding direct military involvement. This alienated Russia without gaining substantial Austrian advantages. When the war ended, Austria had no major power as a reliable ally. The Italian question produced renewed conflict. Piedmont Sardinia, the Italian kingdom seeking to unify Italy under its leadership, allied with France. In April 1859, war began. Napoleon III of France commanded a large modern army, supporting Piedmontese forces. Austrian armies were defeated at Magenta and Solferino in June. The battles were extraordinarily bloody. The suffering at Solferino inspired Henri Dunant to found the Red Cross and promoted the Geneva Conventions. Franz Joseph negotiated directly with Napoleon III at Villafranca in July, bypassing his own military command to make peace. Austria ceded Lombardy to Piedmont, but retained Venetia. This loss of Lombardy eliminated Austria's remaining influence in northern Italy and demonstrated military inadequacy against modern, well-led armies. Domestic reform followed military defeat. Franz Joseph issued the October Diploma in 1860, granting limited constitutional government and restoring some Hungarian autonomy. And this satisfied neither conservatives who opposed any limitations on imperial authority, nor liberals who wanted genuine parliamentary government. The February Patent of 1861 modified the constitution, creating a bicameral parliament, but with limited powers and a restricted franchise ensuring conservative dominance. The German question reached crisis in the 1860s. Prussia, under Otto von Bismarck, pursued German unification under Prussian leadership, excluding Austria. Bismarck was a master of realpolitik, using diplomacy, manipulation, and, when necessary, military force to achieve Prussian goals. He maneuvered Austria into diplomatic isolation, securing French and Russian neutrality while allying with Italy. War began in June 1866. Austria faced enemies on two fronts: Prussian forces invading from the north and Italian armies attacking from the south. The decisive battle occurred at Königgrätz in Bohemia on July 3rd. Prussian forces employed breech-loading rifles, giving them vastly superior firepower. Prussian strategic railways allowed rapid troop concentration. Prussian military organization and tactical doctrine proved superior at every level. The Austrian army was destroyed. Casualties exceeded 45,000 killed, wounded, and captured in a single day. The road to Vienna lay open. Bismarck, however, opposed harsh peace terms, fearing French intervention and wanting Austria as a future ally. The Treaty of Prague in August forced Austria to accept Prussian dominance in Germany. The German Confederation was dissolved. Austria was excluded from German affairs. Venetia was ceded to Italy. Prussian annexations eliminated several German states that had been Austrian allies. This defeat was more psychologically devastating than the military losses. Austria had been pushed out of Germany after leading it for centuries. The Holy Roman Empire's legacy, already ended formally in 1806, was now definitively transferred to Prussia. Austria could no longer claim to speak for the German nation. The empire's future lay in organizing its multinational territories, not in German politics. The dual monarchy created a peculiar political entity. Austria-Hungary functioned as two separate kingdoms sharing a monarch and coordinating defense, foreign policy, and finances for common purposes. Everything else, education, justice, taxation, the internal administration, was handled separately. This meant duplicate bureaucracies, competing national interests, and constant negotiation over shared expenses and military contributions. Vienna experienced an extraordinary cultural flowering during this period. The city became a laboratory for modernism across multiple disciplines. Sigmund Freud developed psychoanalysis, arguing that unconscious drives shaped human behavior and that psychological conflicts could be treated through talk therapy. His theories revolutionized understanding of the human mind, though they remained controversial. Freud practiced in Vienna, treating patients and publishing works that influenced fields far beyond medicine. Gustav Klimt led the Vienna secession movement, breaking from traditional academic art to create works emphasizing decoration, symbolism, and sensuality. His painting, The Kiss, became an icon of Art Nouveau. Egon Schiele produced psychologically intense, often disturbing figurative works. These artists rejected conventional aesthetics, seeking new forms of expression for a modern age. Gustav Mahler composed symphonies of unprecedented scale and emotional complexity. His works incorporated folk melodies, philosophical themes, and orchestrations requiring massive performing forces. Mahler also conducted the Vienna Court Opera, elevating its performances to world-class standards. Arnold Schoenberg and his students developed atonal music, abandoning traditional harmonic systems entirely. Coffeehouse culture flourished. Viennese cafes served as informal offices, meeting places, and reading rooms. Patrons spent hours reading newspapers from across Europe, discussing ideas and observing city life. Writers, artists, and intellectuals gathered regularly, creating informal networks that facilitated cultural exchange. This cosmopolitan atmosphere encouraged innovation and intellectual cross-pollination. Economic modernization proceeded unevenly. Vienna, Prague, and Budapest industrialized significantly. Railways connected the empire's territories. Banking and finance became increasingly sophisticated. However, rural areas remained largely agricultural, with peasants farming using traditional methods. The empire's ethnic and linguistic diversity complicated economic integration, as different regions pursued competing interests. Balkan expansion brought new territories and problems. Austria-Hungary occupied Bosnia-Herzegovina in 1878, formally annexing it in 1908, when this expansion alarmed Serbia, which saw Bosnia's Slavic population as part of a future Greater Serbia. Russia supported Slavic nationalist movements, viewing itself as protector of Slavic peoples under foreign rule. Franz Joseph's personal tragedies compounded throughout his long reign. His only son, Crown Prince Rudolf, died in an apparent murder-suicide at Mayerling in 1889. His wife, Empress Elizabeth, was assassinated by an Italian anarchist in 1898. These losses isolated the aging emperor emotionally, while he continued his administrative routine with mechanical regularity. His nephew Franz Ferdinand became heir. Franz Ferdinand was intelligent, reformist, and unpopular with the court establishment. He advocated transforming the dual monarchy into a federation granting autonomy to all major nationalities, which threatened Hungarian dominance. He married Sophie Chotek, a Czech noblewoman considered insufficiently aristocratic, creating protocol difficulties and court resentment. Vienna blamed Serbia's government for supporting the assassination. Austria-Hungary issued an ultimatum on July 23rd with demands designed to be unacceptable. Suppress anti-Austrian organizations, allow Austrian officials to participate in investigating the conspiracy, and accept Austrian oversight of measures taken. Serbia accepted most terms, but rejected provisions violating sovereignty. Austria-Hungary declared war on July 28th. Russia mobilized to support Serbia. Germany backed Austria-Hungary. France honored its alliance with Russia. Germany invaded Belgium to attack France, bringing Britain into the conflict. Within weeks, a Balkan crisis became a continental war. Austria-Hungary fought on multiple fronts simultaneously. Russian forces invaded Galicia from the east. Serbia resisted Austrian invasions from the north. Italy, despite pre-war alliances with Austria-Hungary, joined the Entente in 1915 and attacked along the Alpine frontier. Romania entered against Austria-Hungary in 1916. This multi-front war strained resources beyond capacity. The military performance was mixed. Initial offensives against Serbia failed disastrously. Russian forces overran Galicia in 1914, though Austria-Hungary recovered the territory with German assistance. The Italian front became a grinding stalemate in mountainous terrain, with 11 battles along the Isonzo River, producing massive casualties for minimal territorial change. The empire's armies fought effectively when supported by German forces, but struggled when operating independently. The home front deteriorated steadily. Food shortages emerged by 1915 as agricultural production fell, and railway capacity was diverted to military needs. Rationing became increasingly severe. Industrial production shifted entirely to war materials, creating shortages of basic consumer goods. Inflation eroded wages. Strikes and protests increased despite wartime censorship and martial law. Nationalist movements intensified. Czech politicians demanded independence or autonomy. South Slavs sought unification with Serbia in a Yugoslav state. Italian-speaking populations supported Italy's war effort. The Polish nationalities were divided between those supporting Austria-Hungary and those supporting Russia or advocating independence. The empire's multinational structure, manageable during peacetime, became fatal under war's pressures. Emperor Franz Joseph died on November 21, 1916, at age 86, having ruled for 68 years. His grandnephew Karl succeeded, inheriting an empire collapsing militarily, economically, and politically. Karl attempted peace negotiations secretly in 1917, but these failed when details leaked, destroying his credibility with Germany and the Entente alike. The First Austrian Republic was proclaimed in November 1918. The Treaty of Saint-Germain in September 1919 set borders and imposed restrictions, and Austria was forbidden from uniting with Germany, required to pay reparations, and limited to a small army. The treaty left a landlocked country of 6.5 million people, predominantly German-speaking, surrounded by potentially hostile neighbors. Economic crisis struck immediately. Hyperinflation destroyed savings and wages. The Austrian crown became worthless, requiring wheelbarrows of cash for basic purchases. Unemployment reached severe levels as industries lost access to former imperial markets. International loans eventually stabilized the currency by 1925, but poverty remained widespread. Political violence erupted between socialists and conservative nationalist forces. Vienna was governed by social democrats who built extensive public housing and social programs, creating Red Vienna as a socialist showcase. Rural Austria and provincial cities remained conservative and Catholic. Paramilitary groups formed on both sides, clashing in street battles. The tensions exploded in February 1934. Government forces bombarded socialist workers' housing complexes in Vienna, crushing a brief civil war. Chancellor Engelbert Dollfuss established Austrofascism, an authoritarian Catholic corporatist state suppressing parliament, banning political parties, and ruling by decree. This was distinct from Nazism but shared authoritarian characteristics. Adolf Hitler, an Austrian-born German chancellor, demanded Austria's incorporation into Germany. On March 12, 1938, German troops crossed the border. The Anschluss, political union, occurred without military resistance. Portions of the Austrian population supported union with Germany, while others opposed it or faced persecution. Austria became Ostmark, a province of Nazi Germany. Austrian citizens became German citizens subject to Nazi laws. Jewish Austrians faced immediate persecution, violence, and property confiscation. Approximately 65,000 Austrian Jews were murdered in the Holocaust. Thousands of others fled if they could. Austria's occupation differed from Germany's. The Allies treated Austria as Hitler's first victim rather than a full co-belligerent, though this interpretation simplified a complex reality. This status facilitated eventual independence. A provisional government formed immediately, led by Karl Renner, who had been chancellor during the First Republic. The four occupying powers controlled different zones. The Soviets held eastern Austria, including parts of Vienna. Americans, British, and French controlled western and southern regions. Vienna itself was divided into 4 sectors, plus an international zone in the city center, rotated monthly among the powers. Unlike Berlin, this division never hardened into permanent partition. Economic recovery was aided by American Marshall Plan funds beginning in 1948. Austria received over $1 billion in grants and loans, financing reconstruction of infrastructure, industrial facilities, and housing. The economy grew steadily through the 1950s, transitioning from agriculture toward industry and services. Negotiations for independence began in 1947, but stalled over Cold War tensions. The breakthrough came after Stalin's death in 1953, when Soviet leadership became willing to compromise. The Austrian State Treaty was signed on May 15, 1955. All occupation forces agreed to withdraw. Austria regained full sovereignty. The price was permanent neutrality. Austria declared it would never join military alliances or allow foreign military bases on its territory. This satisfied Soviet concerns about Western expansion while allowing Austria independence. The last occupation troops left in October 1955. Austria built its post-war identity around neutrality, cultural heritage, and economic prosperity. Tourism expanded dramatically, marketing Alpine scenery, Vienna's musical legacy, and winter sports. The country became a meeting place for East-West diplomacy during the Cold War, hosting international organizations and summit conferences. European integration proceeded carefully. Austria joined the European Free Trade Association in 1960, but did not pursue European Community membership while neutrality and Cold War divisions persisted. After the Soviet Union collapsed, Austria joined the European Union on January 1, 1995, while maintaining its neutral status. Contemporary challenges include immigration debates, right-wing populism's periodic electoral success, and questions about historical memory regarding World War II. Austria remains prosperous, politically stable, and culturally influential beyond its geographic size. The small republic has outlasted the empire, achieving through adaptation what could not be maintained through power. From Celtic salt mines to EU member state, Austria's journey spans 2.5 millennia of survival through geography, culture, and adaptability.